Good evening. Welcome to the Tuesday, January 14th, 2020 City Commission meeting. We will start with approving our agenda. The City Commission reserves the right to amend, supplement, or reorder the agenda during the meeting. Are there any items that a commissioner wishes to move or change on our agenda?
No.
Okay.
I move to approve the agenda.
Second?
Motion.
Oh.
We don't do public comment on this one. Thank you for keeping us on our toes, Sherry. A motion from Commissioner Larson, second from Vice Mayor Finkeldye. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. We will move on to our proclamations. We have one proclamation this week. Do we have some folks here to speak with us on this item?
To the City Commission, I'm Pastor Leo Barton Jr., the president of the Martin Luther King celebration, but also Ecumenical Fellowship Incorporated. We've been in operation for a long time. We want to thank you for your support down through the years. We appreciate it so very, very much. But we're having the gospel concert, but we're not having it in January because it's so cold. The last time we've had it, it's been cold and snow. But we are having the gospel concert on April 26th at the Connect Church on 31st Street. So we appreciate your participation. You will be seeing announcements for the gospel choir, and hopefully many of you who can sing come and join us for the singing of the gospel choir. But Dr. Bernie Kish will share with you about an activity that we're all a part of at this particular time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Barbie. Good evening. We have our 13th annual Martin Luther King Community Breakfast on the morning of the 20th of January at Michelle's Restaurant at 7:30 a.m. The Jayhawk Breakfast Rotary Club does this in conjunction with the Ecumenical Ministers of Lawrence. And I would like to say that we're very honored to do this because it was Reverend Barbie, Reverend Doolin, and the late Reverend Paul Wynn in 1986 who began the Martin Luther King celebration recognition in Lawrence, Kansas. As far as what we're doing for our 13th annual is we have a speaker, Dr. David Tell, who will be speaking on remembering Emmett Till. Vanessa Thomas will be our entertainment. And then finally, we will present a scholarship to a deserving African-American senior at one of the Lawrence high schools. The speech will be very, very interesting. Dr. Tell has done research over the last several years, made several trips to Mississippi to study what was going on to commemorate the murder of Emmett Till. That incidentally happened in August of 1955. Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy from Chicago who visited his cousins in Mississippi. While he was there at Bryant's grocery store, he whistled at a white woman and within 2 days had been murdered. A lot of scholars say that it was this murder that was the catalyst for Rosa Parks to do her Montgomery boycott in December of 1955, and then Dr. King, a young minister at the Dexter Street Baptist Church in Montgomery, who then also got on board. So a lot of scholars contend that it was the murder of Emmett Till that really triggered the civil rights movement in 1955. And I think you'll find Dr. Tell's lecture, he has written a book called Remembering Emmett Till. I think you'll find it very interesting. I know Mr. Boley has attended several of our breakfasts in the past. Brad, who's a member of our club, has done the same, and I would invite all of you and the audience for a very interesting community breakfast on Monday. Thank you all very much.
I do want to say we're still giving 2 $1,000 scholarships to students as well at the Lawrence High or Free State School. We still do that.
Wonderful. Okay, I will read the proclamation. Whereas the theme of this 35th annual celebration is here, and by such an event, we are reaffirming our rights as citizens and the liberties that we enjoy. And we are expressing our hopes, dreams, and beliefs possible in the United States. And whereas we rededicate ourselves to the truths that he strove for in this special year of commemoration, We thus engage in the valuable activity of reserving a day or days toward that end, and we recall the legacy that the Reverend Dr. King created. And whereas it is remembered in the exceptional and separate character of our values as expressed by Dr. King, and this legacy is expressed in national holidays and in the building of monuments for him, and other models of American patriotism. And whereas the Reverend Dr. King stated the ultimate weakness of violence is that it is a descending spiral, begetting the very thing that it seeks to destroy. Instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it. Through violence you may murder the liar, but you cannot murder the lie, nor establish the truth. Through violence you may murder the hater, but you do not murder hate. In fact, violence merely increases hate. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And whereas the City of Lawrence, Kansas, the Ecumenical Fellowship, and the Jayhawk Breakfast Rotary Club, along with other community institutions, are all cooperating to support the activities planned for the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday and encourage citizens of Lawrence to show their commitment to continue to develop Dr. King's vision by participating in them. Now therefore I, Jennifer Ananda, Mayor of the City of Lawrence, Kansas, do hereby proclaim the week of January 13th through 20th, 2020 as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Week.
Thank you very much.
Okay, now we will move on to our consent agenda. Please note all matters below listed on the consent agenda are considered under one motion and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on those items. If discussion is desired, then that item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. Members of the public wishing to speak to an item that has been pulled from the consent agenda will be limited to 3 minutes for comments. Are there any items that a commissioner would like to pull from the consent agenda? Are there any items that a member of the audience would like to pull from the consent agenda? 2B. C2B? Okay. Any other items that the member of the public would like to pull? Do we have a motion?
A motion to approve the consent agenda with the exception of item C2B.
Second?
A motion from Commissioner Larson, a second from Vice Mayor Finkeldye. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Now we'll talk about item C2B.
My name is Matthew Herbert. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I had hoped to have this conversation while I was in the comfy chair still, but now that I've been downgraded to hard plastic, it seems like as good a time as any. On the consent agenda tonight, you have a motion just simply to receive the minutes from the Social Service Advisory Board. And I acknowledge that this is probably the wrong place for this public comment. The correct place is probably at the next Social Service Advisory Board meeting. However, the minutes you're receiving tonight list that next meeting as occurring in October of 2019. So I'm here tonight. In the minutes you're receiving, members of the advisory board considered funding requests from social service agencies, held discussion, and ultimately forwarded to the commission funding level recommendations. In the meeting minutes, one particular sentence jumps out at me in such a way I cannot help but draw public attention to it for what I believe to be toxic ideology behind it. The sentence is as follows and is in those minutes. The board noted Just Food's ability to fundraise and noted that they are likely not very reliant on these funds to maintain their operation. This singular sentence within the board minutes suggests that we should approach funding levels from a survival standpoint and assign higher funding to those organizations who cannot successfully survive or fundraise on their own. The advisory board appears to have taken this to heart, as the recommendation made for Just Food was only 20% of the requested amount and only 50% of the allocated amount from the year prior. The nature of this public comment is not to address the allocated dollars, however. In the grand scheme of things, this is not the issue or the long-term concern for the city. The issue is the reason why the allocation was recommended. The issue is that sentence. The board noted Just Food's ability to fundraise and noted that they are likely not very reliant on these funds to maintain their operation. This, to me, is bad policy. It punishes those organizations who truly embody the nature of a public-private relationship. It not only builds dependency upon the city, but encourages it. To successfully fundraise privately on the front end now means recommendations that you lose those public dollars on the back end. Such a policy is a mistake. Since taking over as director, Liz Keever has done wonders with Just Food. I cannot sing her praises loudly enough here tonight. She is, in my opinion, one of the best not-for-profit directors our community has to offer. She can fundraise like few I've ever seen. Good for her, good for Just Food, and great for our community. The Just Food economic model should be duplicated by other social service agencies if at all possible. It should be celebrated for its successes, not punished for them. So what can we do about it here? Mayor Ananda, you hold the power to recommend people to serve on this board. This ought to be a litmus test question. We need to find out if their ability to fundraise will be used as a tool to punish them in the budgetary year. That's all I ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Any questions on this one? Any other public comment?
Hi, I'm Chris Flowers, and I think he makes a good point, because it's like sometimes in sports teams when the lowest, whoever finishes last gets like a better draft pick. Could these nonprofits purposely start sucking so they get their money? I mean, it does raise a question, is this something that could be abused at some point? Not that it's necessarily happening now, but it could be abused, I think. Thank you.
Is this public comment on just this issue or regular public comment?
Public comment on this issue from the consent agenda.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, we will bring it back up to the commission.
I would like to, I attended that meeting, Matthew, when they had that, and that was one comment that really stood out, and I was pretty offended by it, and I think it was Commissioner Davis who had indicated that, and I don't think there was any malice meant, but I just was shocked to hear that if you are really good at what you do, then we're going to give you less. And I know Just Food has done a great job, and they need to be commended for that, and that's not how we should be selecting how we divide our money up for social services. And so I would also just agree that we just need to make sure that we get folks on that committee that realize that, and that we need to be dividing this money up appropriately and not because they are poor or good fundraisers necessarily.
Other comment? I think it is an opportunity to assess the how, not just the how much or the why of how we make those decisions, and really looking at creating our strategic plan as an opportunity to be something that might be an informant on this issue as we consider, is it a matrix? Is it a series of questions? What does that look like? So Matthew, I appreciate you coming back into this room so quickly after stepping down. It's nice to see you in bringing this to our attention. Thank you.
I guess I'd like to say that I think it would be useful for the commission to have the advisory board minutes as we're making this decision on the budget, so that all of us have the possibility to read how they, actually read how they made their decisions. So I think that would have perhaps been useful for Commissioner Herbert and the rest of us in the budget process that we just completed in August. So.
Sherry, do we need a motion to receive this?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have a motion?
I move to receive the Social Service Funding Advisory Board meeting minutes of 6/24/19 as set forth in C.5 Bid.
Second.
Motion by Vice Mayor Finkeldye, second by Commissioner Larson. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, we will move on to public comment. The public is allowed to speak to any items or issues except those scheduled on the consent agenda or regular agenda portions of the agenda, after being first recognized by the mayor. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes for public comment. As a general practice, the commission will not discuss or debate these items, nor will the commission make decisions on items presented during this time. Rather, they will refer the items to staff for follow-up if necessary. Individuals are asked to come to the microphone, sign in, and state their name and address. Speakers should address all comments and questions to the commission. Any general public comment on items not on the regular agenda?
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Pardon me. My name is Katie Walsh. I live at 732 Rhode Island, and I just wanted to invite you and the whole world to the Martin Luther King Chili Feed at New York Elementary School. It's Tuesday evening, 5 to 7. There'll be vegetarian and meat chili. The kids serve, and the kids will sing. And it's a lovely event, so please come. New York School is at 9th in New York, right next to St. Luke AME Church. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
Dan Dannenberg, 2702 University Drive. I'd like to thank Commissioner Shipley for coming out on a recent Friday morning and walking down University Drive with me. University Drive, where I live, is almost all rental properties. And this time of the year, we enjoy it because most of the KU student wildlife have migrated out of town. And we have a little sense of peace and security. We get some sense of how the people of Paris, France must have felt when the Allied armies liberated their cities in the summer of 1944. And at least we have one person who is interested in the plight of neighborhoods where the predominant ownership and occupancy of the properties are rental and owned basically by people who live outside the city. In other words, I guess those will be the, we might have to change the name from University Drive to Finkelday Drive or something like that, because I'm sure he is most partial to this cohort. But thanks again, Commissioner Shipley, for showing your interest and giving me a chance to show you some of the, polite word is crap, that we have to put up with in living amongst these rental properties. And you can tell by the way they weather and wear that they were built cheaply and they were built for depreciation and rental income. And if they get maintained, it's only because someone like me becomes an obnoxious twit and comes here and barks. So you will hear more of my invective, Commissioner Boley.
Okay, other public comment?
My name is Yoshi. I live on West 27th. Lawrence has long passed its critical point. You cannot ignore the ugly truth any longer. This city and its commission, according to its legal and historical record, supports state violence against some of its most defenseless residents. According to its policies, the City of Lawrence actively funds and encourages violence on houseless people. City Ordinance 14-417 clearly states the city's official stance on houselessness. You don't care about poor people, and you think it's right to destroy the already precarious lives and way of life of some 400 people in your city. City Ordinance 14-417 makes it lawful for anyone in the city to wield the police apparatus to rid their world of unwanted people. Anyone who doesn't like the sight of people in poverty can simply make them disappear with one phone call. City Ordinance 14-418 is another official policy which enables the police to harass and disrupt the lives of houseless people. It criminalizes actions which for some are their only way of surviving their immediate circumstances. Laws like this are only the written manifestation of the general public belief here in Lawrence, and particularly its lawmakers. You've enabled the escalation of violence through these policies. You've allowed officers to commit heinous acts against houseless individuals and get away with it. You've even unleashed dogs they've even unleashed dogs to attack houseless people. They've used bulldozers to bury the existence of houseless people. All of a person's possessions, their only form of shelter, all that is left of their life is buried in the dirt. These are cruel, inhumane policies, yet it remains a core belief of both the government and large sections of the general public. Cruelty towards people in poverty is unmistakably Lawrence. It's time for you all to face the society you've created. We demand the repeal of ordinances 14-417 and 14-418. We demand that you order the police to stop the violence against houseless people and terminate officers that terrorize houseless people. We demand that houseless people are recognized as fully human. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is KP, and I live on 23rd Street. I'd like to discuss everything the city has done regarding the houseless population for so far. The first thing is that y'all didn't fully fund the shelter, but did give millions of dollars to the police. You lied to us in another commission meeting saying you had funded the shelter when in fact you hadn't, and that's the entire reason that we're here today. You strictly limit the hours that the drop-in center or the DARE center can run, and you almost didn't even allow it to open because the rich neighborhood complained in the first place. You limit only 15 people allowed to stay in the emergency cold shelters that the churches run. 5, you told us you would stop the police from tearing down camps. This was either a lie or you were ineffective at actually being able to enforce this. The police have only further escalated their violence. And you refused to repeal ordinances 14-417 and 14-418 that effectively criminalize being houseless. Because of these actions, people are suffering. Some of them have lost their limbs in the cold weather. And it shouldn't take people losing their lives as well. You don't care about houseless people, and why? Okay, that's my time.
Thank you. I want to quickly remind folks that we will be talking about the issue of the supplemental funding on our regular agenda item. So these items should be items not on the regular agenda. Obviously, that talking about the ordinance and other things around that are not on the regular agenda. So I just want to clarify that those are two separate issues.
Stewart, 1515 Ingle Road. Before I begin, I would like to issue a general content warning for descriptions of violence and suffering. First, blood flow moves away from the skin. The body focuses its resources on maintaining the operations of its vital organs. It becomes harder to think, harder to take any action. The body starts to slow down. Electrical signals in the brain weaken, blood pressure, heart rate, and breathing all decrease. In many cases, fatigue takes over the body and sleep results. Finally, multiple organs, including the heart, fail, ultimately resulting in a death full of discomfort and terror. The death of anyone from hypothermia when places of businesses, churches, and other buildings have available space and respite from the cold is morally repugnant. No one in this room, in this building, and in this city should have to endure the harrowing symptoms that foretell a cruel and preventable death. Yet, even here in Lawrence, Kansas, there are a preponderance of stories about friends and loved ones dying from exposure to the cold. If imagining such a fate for yourself shocks you to the core, it should be all the more unsettling to picture the hundreds of individuals who are forced to confront such a fear every single day. A 2018 study in New York found that 75% of people receiving treatment for cold-related illnesses were outside. 50% were houseless, and 25% had no heating at home. These statistics alone paint a pretty clear picture of the risk factors going into these injuries and deaths. Most importantly, however, the vast majority of deaths and illnesses happen during periods without extremely cold temperatures. Death from hypothermia is not some aberration that only happens after periods of drastic snowfall, strong wind chill, or adverse weather conditions. It can happen in a chilly October night, a long overcast November day spent outside, or after a light February snowfall. Ergo, the City Commission must recognize the repeated calls for action and cold weather planning are not capricious demands or a political football. They reflect the need to address very real and serious suffering endured by the most marginalized. You have all failed in addressing this in a timely and serious manner. The fact that it took us all the way from October till now to get some honest commitment towards an action in the form of funding is frankly sickening. You will have to deal with this from year to year to year, and I sincerely hope that these issues will be taken more seriously in the future. Because as it stands, Lawrence is failing as a so-called progressive city. Forcing people out of their homes is not progressive. Destroying people's personal property is not progressive. Denying people shelter is not progressive. Letting people suffer and die outside is not progressive. It is yet from this body's repeated failures, such a vicious campaign of targeted neglect, harassment, and abuse can only be called unmistakably Lawrence. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Susan Ford J. Lopez. I live behind Amtrak. I came to tell you about Terry. Terry right now is in the hospital undergoing another emergency surgery. He lost his toes to frostbite last month because he was sleeping out by 23rd behind some buildings. And he had nowhere to go. So he lost his toes. Sunday, we went and found some people that would take some homeless people in. And we tried to get him over there, but we couldn't get him upstairs because the apartment wasn't handicapped accessible. People out here are trying. An 18-year-old is trying to help us homeless when it's cold on Sunday. Yes, thank you for the emergency shelter. Kick them out at 7 in the morning when they're in a wheelchair, when there's snow on the ground. Come on, there's got to be an exception here or there. And now he's back in the hospital, I just found out. And they're bringing in a specialist for more surgery. It's ridiculous. Okay. I'm lucky I got a -30 sleeping bag. And I basically live in it when I'm in my camp. And I'm lucky enough that I got a pair of Carhartts given to me. I'm not homeless by choice. okay? 2 domestic violence. I don't have an ID. I've been trying to get one. A whole slew of things that led me to this, to where I'm stuck. Okay, so you hear people yelling things at me, how I'm not a resident, how I don't deserve any rights. I'm a human being. I got God-given rights the day I was born. This is disgusting.
My name is Alex Rodriguez. I live at 2333 Ridge Court. You all know me. Winter is here and houseless people are suffering. The cold brings frostbite, the snow and ice bury tents, and this city commission has not only failed to repeal city ordinances that further endanger the lives of our vulnerable houseless neighbors, but has also allowed the police to escalate their brutality and violence against them. In the last few weeks, houseless people have been attacked by house citizens who have assaulted them and destroyed their tents, and they've been brutalized by the police, who have gone so far as to chase people out of their camps using attack dogs. Despite false promises from Lisa Larson, who claimed that she told the police to stop destroying the tents and property of houseless people, the police and the city Parks and Recreation Department have continued to bulldoze campsites and bury everything people need to survive. Despite months of vocal demands for change from the community, both housed and houseless, the city government and the commission that leads it have done next to nothing to ease the suffering its decisions and neglect have caused. And tonight we hope to see that change with a vote to completely adequately fund the Lawrence Community Shelter. However, that is far from enough. We demand that City Ordinance 14417, criminalizing camping on public property that we pay to maintain, be completely repealed so that houseless people can finally have a place to safely exist without the threat of violence from the police who terrorize them. We demand that the city immediately forbid police violence against the houseless and enforce that ban with meaningful actions, including termination from the police force, as well as a firm plan for combating homelessness in this city in all seasons. We demand that the houseless be recognized as fully human and that the city finally cut its bullshit and stop condemning the vulnerable to death.
Hi. My name is Faith, and I live at 1340 Ohio Street. I'm a student at KU, and this is my first year living in Lawrence. I specifically want to speak to Ordinance 14417 tonight. As of now, it's illegal for houseless people to camp on public property. So I want to ask, why have you criminalized the very act of being houseless? Why do you allow police to brutalize defenseless people? Where are they supposed to go? Being poor isn't a crime, even if it's easier to go home and stomach the fact that it's not your problem. It is. It's all of ours. There's not a scarcity of real estate in Lawrence. I can go online and find any number of properties being shoved down my throat. What there is a scarcity of empathy. These people are your neighbors, not panhandlers, not scammers, not people you should fear or turn up your nose at. They are humans. Our city's poverty level is 47% higher than the national average, and median household income is 13% below that. Obstacles to climbing out of poverty are abundant. So do your job. Be a real human. Because right now you're letting people freeze and die in the street, and thousands of people are watching. And they will remember the names of the people who allowed this to happen. We will not stop holding you accountable, and all eyes are on you. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lacey Rowe, and I'm also going to reiterate some pieces of data. The unemployment rate in Lawrence is 3%, which is 27% lower than the national average, and yet the poverty rate in Lawrence is 22%, which is 47% higher than the national average. The unemployment rate means nothing without living wages. According to areavibes.com, which has a data analysis of housing and cost of living and other indexes, Lawrence has received a grade F rating based on their data analysis of housing in Lawrence. I believe that it is the city's responsibility, and I hope that the city commissioners will agree with me, that it is your duty to enact policies that protect people in this city, to promote healthy communities, and policies that keep people alive. I hope that the City Commission will agree that it is a failure if people are allowed to die through your silence and your inaction when it could have been entirely avoidable. I hope that the City Commission will agree that it is your responsibility to not let this happen. I support policies that alleviate poverty in Lawrence. I support policies aimed at eradicating homelessness in Lawrence. I support policies that ensure that the most vulnerable residents in Lawrence have the help and support that they need. I support policies that make Lawrence a better place to live for everyone and not just a select few. I hope that these are the types of policies that our newly elected City Commission will focus on, and that we will begin to do a much better job of addressing these problems. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to address the fact that there is basically no safety in this town.
Can you state your name for the record, please?
My name is Margaret.
Thank you.
I have a mental handicap, as many people may know. I have not prepared this speech because I've come here as one who is somewhat perplexed by all of this commotion. I don't exactly know what you guys think, but what I think is that this town needs better communication. There is absolutely no communication between the homeless community and regular people. That is because there's absolutely no connection between them per se when you speak of resources. And I may have not done my homework all the time, but I did accomplish many things. And I was not aware of the astounding rate of all hell that has broken loose. I cannot say any more, but if I have to see people on the street and serve them kindness and joy and respect in turn of the police or other figures, I might become a police officer. What do you think of that? Or what will I do? Will I move because of the disparity that we have here? I mean, I don't even know. It just so happens to be that I have no faith in common humanity as far as it goes with, let's say, my family. I'm on the verge of being homeless. And people may think, there is this girl. What is she doing? Why is she walking the streets? Well, you haven't heard my story. You haven't led my life. And furthermore, if I have to challenge you without a degree, then what did you guys go to school for? That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Hamza. I live on 24th Street. To many people in Kansas, Lawrence has a reputation of being a progressive city. Walking up and down Mass, you'll see dozens of signs claiming that old people are welcome here. But this is a lie. Lawrence is a city built on a veneer of progressive attitudes while continuing to treat some of its citizens as brutally as so many other cities across the country would. And you can see this if you just pay attention to what goes on here all the time. This city has previously tried to force through a deeply unpopular jail expansion. This city has tried to build expensive student housing on the middle of Mass that only rich kids would ever even get a chance to live in. This city has given millions of dollars to the police department, who actively harass and attack the houseless. Some of you commissioners have lied to our faces about funding to the shelter, about ticketing camps, and about supposedly telling the police to stop. But the issues have only been getting worse since we started talking here a few months ago. The houseless still face harassment by the police. The houses still have limited options when it comes to getting food in the middle of the day. The houses still have issues with getting around town. Programs like DARE, Bert Nash, Social Service League, or LINK are only Band-Aids over a deep wound. Some people in this town have been trying their best to provide as much help as they can for the houseless because the city, specifically you all, have refused to do anything. But by themselves, they won't ever be able to do enough to actually provide houseless people with what they truly need. You 5 have the power to do something, and you have totally failed in that regard. Oftentimes, you drag your feet on what really needs to be done. Sometimes you even actively impede any real solutions, even temporary ones. The primary issue here is with houselessness as a concept. We will always have to be fixing these problems that come up if we refuse to admit that houselessness is not a necessity. Houselessness is not something that people choose, but an effect of real policies like that you guys make. Failing in the ways that you all have is unacceptable, and the only way to really fix this is to take a look at what needs to be done. We don't need temporary solutions to a permanent problem. We need permanent solutions, including the repeal of Ordinance 14417 and 14418 for adequate funding of the shelter, and for all you to just do your job and start housing people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? All right. Hello, my name is Zeke. I live on Vermont Street. Other people have said many more specific points a lot better than I definitely could with a lot more research and doing their homework, but I'd like to speak to just one issue in particular. I'd like to really ask the City Commission to please heavily consider planning and creating comprehensive plans for houseless people, not just patchwork solutions relying on volunteer time, free funds, goodwill. This past weekend in particular, without getting into individual people's specifics, the patchwork system of supporting houseless people and just keeping people alive fell through. For a number of hours, people were exposed to the bitter cold, the harsh snow, ice, everything. And just because all of these little separate systems didn't magically align, tie that into obviously just the honestly inhumane treatment of houseless people by the police that others have, again, spoken better to. It's unconscionable, it's unthinkable. I can't read y'all's mind, and I really hope that after tonight, or honestly, I really wish before tonight, way before tonight, there would have been some thinking, some thought that there would be a comprehensive plan, not just a 5-second thought, and then, oh, that problem's solved. I really genuinely hope you aren't waiting to run out the clock until winter's over and think that this problem will be solved once it gets warmer out. I hope right now, on top of solving the immediate issues right in front of our faces, you're starting to think about a summer plan, because it's going to be very hot this summer. It's not just the ice and cold that makes life hell. When it gets to be 100 degrees out, that's a whole new set of problems. And if the time scale that the City Commission has worked on these set of issues are any indication, I'd really hope that you start today on this so that we can have hopefully some sort of half plan by summer. And if we start today, even hopefully by next year, the City Commission could have tied its shoes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Victoria Kist. I don't have anything prepared for you guys tonight. I only heard about this issue a couple of days ago. I am one of the fortunate ones that have a safety net and people that have housing available for me to have a roof over my head and heat. I have been houseless before, and I can tell you, nobody wants to be in that situation. Everybody wants to be able to get back on their feet and provide a house over their heads on their own. But you cannot do that if all of your personal possessions are bulldozed. You cannot do that if you are being harassed in your one place where you can exist. And erasing places where people can exist does not erase the people. They have to go somewhere. And with the infrastructure that we have, we ought to be able to provide a place for someone to sleep at night. There are so many empty buildings, and there are so many avenues that we can take to ensure that people can get back on their feet and be productive members of society. I know that's what they want in their heart, and they're just looking for a way to get back on their feet. Nobody chooses this, and they don't deserve to be treated with such inhumane disrespect. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Vine. I live at West 24th. I appreciate everything I heard here tonight. I just transitioned from being homeless. I've been homeless on the streets of Lawrence for about 3 years. I know what frostbite feels like. I know what it's like to lose toes. I know what it's like to lose toenails. I know what hyperthermia feels like. If any of you guys don't, you guys have brothers or sisters or anybody, I wouldn't wish that on any of your guys' people. I have friends that I never had in this town until I came here that I care about that are still out there on the streets. This guy who lost his toes, I know that guy. I give him money when I see him. I just ask that you guys humble yourselves with us and show a little compassion. These people, we didn't ask to be homeless. There's a lot of reasons why people become homeless. There's problems at home. There's abuse. There's stuff people don't like to talk about. That's a lot of people that I've met, a lot of young people left home because they didn't want to be abused. These are good people. I lived amongst them for 3 years. I still deal with them. I love them. They're people like us. You guys help me get a place. Let's help these guys get a place too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Looney. I live at 1103 Cynthia. This summer, my partner, my 1-year-old, and I ended up homeless. We found ourselves sleeping in a tent out by Clinton Lake. We sat out in 100-degree heat, being eaten alive by mosquitoes, preparing food by campfire. Some more privileged people might think that they should go out and do this for fun. I can assure you, it was not fun. We were lucky enough to have a car. We were able to get back on our feet quickly, only with a lot of help from those around me. The city could offer me no help. That's what you do to help someone to end someone's being homeless. You help them. To think that this city would have waged war on my family by attacking us with dogs is absolutely revolting. There is no compassion in actions like this, only hate. It seems rich people like yourselves see more benefit in exterminating homeless folks rather than taking care of them. I find myself also wondering why more of the city wasn't made aware of this incident. I found out about this a few hours ago. This is a huge deal. I'm gonna say it now. Lawrence doesn't care about homeless people. Lawrence doesn't care about poor people. Lawrence Police Department especially doesn't care about them. Last time I spoke at City Hall, I mentioned that I have never walked down Mass without seeing a victim of homelessness. When I heard the shelter was reducing its capacity, I was heartbroken because I knew that people would probably die from the cold as a result of this. Exacerbated climate change hits poor people and homeless people first. I am a citizen of this city, and I demand you take action. You wage war on your own citizens. I'm here tonight because this issue is about me, because housing in Lawrence is in an absolute crisis. It's having such a huge impact on this community. Homeless people are human beings. Homeless people deserve to be safe. Being homeless is not a crime. Homeless people deserve just as much respect as you do, Mrs. Mayor. Fund the shelters. I hope when all of you go back to the homes you own tonight, with your refrigerators full of food and your warm beds, that you understand that you don't deserve any of it because you treat your fellow human beings like dirt. Homeless people are human beings like your mom. Homeless people are human beings like your dad. Homeless people are human beings like your brother. Homeless people are human beings like your sister. Homeless people are human beings like your husband. Homeless people are human beings like your wife. Homeless people are human beings like your son. Homeless people are human beings like your daughter. Homeless people are human beings just like you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Audrey Epson. I live over on East 14th Street. So, looks like you guys are in for another long night at the office, right? Probably wouldn't have happened had you not passed these unethical and inhumane ordinances, hoping that the lots of people that are homeless and houseless in this fine city would go unnoticed. And frankly, it did go unnoticed. I heard about this like a lot of other people last minute. I didn't prepare much, but, to quote Micah Edmondson, you cannot love your neighbor while accepting and supporting systems that crush, exploit, dehumanize them. You cannot love your neighbor while accepting less for them than what you would do for your own family. Have a good rest of your night.
Thank you.
Greeting, Commissioners. My name's Eric Bloom. I live on Turnberry. I'm entering the 23rd year of living in Lawrence, Kansas, and I'm taking a little break from this gravity, but I want to say that I want to tell the Commission why I live in Lawrence, because this is a great city, and it takes a lot of work. Not one topic defines everything. Everything that makes a city run, you can always find an outlier or a negative to gripe upon. I want to say that the city sent me a survey and asked what would my primary issues be. I appreciate that. I felt like my voice was heard. I think that the traffic could be better. I think the safety of things can be better. But I also know that this is some of the best water you can drink. I have recycling that just shows up at my door every other week. That's pretty amazing. I have a lot of things that I'm passionate about, and Lawrence fits the bill for me. And I want to say that I appreciate the things that are there for me as a resident. My child enjoys school here, and he's excelling because of efforts that come from commissioners like yourself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chris Flowers again. I didn't come here with anything prepared. And I just want to say, someone said earlier about how y'all don't care about the homeless. I just want to say that's absolutely right, because if the city actually cared about the homeless, they wouldn't have built the homeless shelter clear outside of town. I mean, that right there shows you how much the city actually cares about the homeless. So, and I'm not sure exactly these ordinances, but I can already tell they're bad. So I support these people. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, my name is Ashlyn Graham. I was homeless just 4.5 months ago. I was at the shelter when they decreased the population there. I saw the people as they had to leave and they had to get tents to go out into the woods. I saw them as they had to go find the campgrounds. I saw them as they were hurting, as they had to go live in the woods, and now you are making them unable to do that, as they have to go relocate again. I have seen them hurt. I was broken. These people helped me. These people helped me as I was suicidal and broken, as I was falling apart. If it weren't for these people, these homeless people, I would probably still be homeless today. These people were my family. These were my friends. And you are attacking them. You are harassing them, and you are hurting them. I have seen what you guys have done to them, and it is disgusting. You are not helping your fellow man like you should. You are hurting them. Thank you.
Any other general public comment on items not on the regular agenda?
I would like to
You may.
ask staff, if you would look into, there's quite a few items that were brought up about concerns that was expressed and were expressed. I would ask that staff take a look at all these to see, how we have participated in this or not participated in this, and also some of the accusations regarding the police and the situation with releasing or something to do with dogs. That I find that very concerning, if that's true. But I know you've been doing some investigation on that, so I'd appreciate it if staff could look into all the items that were brought up by this group of our members of our community.
Of course, we'll be happy to do that. If there has been any police misconduct, we do have a department where they can register those concerns, and we do want to hear about those. We did, in noticing some flyers, we did investigate any kind of a canine application or attack. We went thoroughly through those, looking for anything that could be construed as anything close to that, and we found no indication that our canines had been deployed at anything like that. It would be a violation of policy, seriously violation of policy. So we would like to hear concerns, any of the specifics related to that, or any of these other misdeeds or acts of city staff, because that's not consistent with who we are. So we would like to have more information. We will investigate them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if there are more specifics that anybody has that was brought up by the members of the public today, we would sure appreciate hearing that, so we can do a proper investigation of that.
All right. Anything else from the commission? Okay, thank you.
Actually, there's two ordinances that people are referring to that's come up before, and I seem to remember, Jennifer, you asking for some more information from staff about those. Do we have a timeline on having a discussion about that?
I was going to bring that up during commission
Okay.
items.
Okay.
So, but yeah, thanks for bringing it up. All right, so let's move on to our regular agenda item. Consider mid-year request from the Lawrence Community Shelter for supplemental funding in the amount of $31,000 for 2020.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the Commission. I'm Assistant City Manager Casey Toomey, and I'm here tonight just to give you a brief introduction to this agenda item. Back when we did our budget process for 2020, there was an allocation made to the Lawrence Community Shelter. It was not at the level that was requested by the Lawrence Community Shelter, and after some tough deliberations, the comment was made by then Mayor Larson that maybe we could come back and look at the allocation for the community shelter once we knew our sales tax collections for the year. This conversation came up again at your meeting last week, and so we wanted to put that on an agenda for you tonight to consider. Oh, that's not it. I don't know what I did. Bear with me while I scroll down here. Renee Kuhl is here, the Executive Director of the Lawrence Community Shelter, and she'll come up in a few minutes to give you an overview of their request. It is for $31,000 of additional funds. The city does have a mid-year funding request, and I realize it's not mid-year. It's just the start of the calendar year, but really that policy addresses any request for funding that comes in after the city's budget gets adopted. So I did want to draw your attention to that policy. It outlines, zoom in here, the guidelines for consideration of these types of requests. It asks that the commission consider how this would fill an existing gap in city services, meet a city commission or community goal, provide a need in the community that is otherwise unmet, and help leverage other outside funds. And I think it's obvious that this request would meet some of those stated goals there. And the policy also goes on to provide an assessment method, and it asks the commission to utilize the following guidelines. Is the request a high enough priority to justify the allocation of contingency funds? The purpose of this is that we never know at any given point throughout the year what our actual expenditures are going to be and what our actual revenues are going to be. So there could be a circumstance whether revenues don't meet our budget expectations or our expenditure budget is exceeded, where we would have to spend down fund balance. In this particular instance, we're talking about spending proceeds from the sales tax collections in 2019, and every indication is that that revenue source is going to exceed our budget for the year. We still don't know about our 2019 expenses. The city's books technically stay open through the end of February, so it's unlikely, but the policy does want you all to consider that in the circumstance that we would have to spend down contingency funds or fund balance. The other assessment guideline is what are the long-range implications. And I think that's a conversation you all can have if this is a one-time supplemental request, or if it would be understood that this would be the new level of funding contribution from the city. That's the policy. Again, I'll invite Renee. I think Thea Perry may also be here to visit with you all. I did want to also highlight in your packet this information that kind of outlines the city's contribution over the past few years, as well as the county's contribution. It highlights not only our direct financial contribution, but some other indirect support that the city and county provide. And then this one kind of broke it down a little bit different, just from kind of our annual allocation of direct support, and then the supplemental request we've seen here in the last 5 years for both the city and the county. So I'll scroll back up there to that policy, and then I'll turn it over to Renee, unless you have any questions for me.
Any questions for Casey? Yep, thanks, Casey.
How much time do I get to talk? I won't talk for forever. Is there like
Short of
3
forever.
minutes? Okay, gotcha. Okay, that's fine.
More than 3 minutes if you would like to take them. Since this is your request, you have more time to have that conversation.
Okay, great. Okay, good to know. I want to thank and acknowledge all the folks who came to speak. It makes me a little bit emotional, and I really care so much about you guys. And the stories of folks is always moving to me, and it's troubling as well. This is my life. I've made a huge professional and personal commitment to Lawrence by coming here to run the shelter. And so I'm in solidarity with you guys. The proposal that I've suggested today will not alleviate the problem of unsheltered homelessness this winter. And what we've asked is for $31,000 to expand a cold weather shelter program to provide shelter for folks on nights where the temperatures drop below 32 degrees. We'll work and coordinate with the winter shelter that is being run at First United Methodist and offer expanded access to shelter on those nights in coordination with Christy. At this point in the winter, it's hard for us to expand or do much more just because of time. Every time we expand beds, we have to train folks, hire folks, and then we have to have managers in place to manage those folks. I know that Lawrence has been through a year-long process of investigating more deeply what it looks like to do shelter in a way that's safe, productive, efficient, effective, and trauma-informed for people experiencing homelessness. I take very seriously the safety and conditions in which the people in my care at the Lawrence Community Shelter are sheltered. I take very seriously their journey from homelessness to housing. I believe that when folks come into the shelter, that we should do everything in our power to help people become housed again. I really have a housing first approach. I agree with the principles that the housing first body of research lays out for communities, which is that people don't become cured of their behavioral health disorders, whether they're substance use disorders or mental health disorders or chronic illness or disabilities while they're living in shelter, and they certainly don't become cured of them while they're unsheltered. People have to be housed to get healthy. It's so important. And so the shift that the shelter has made in terms of its program model is to really emphasize this and to emphasize people's safety and security while they're at the shelter, to ensure that young people, women, folks who are LGBT are not exposed to the increased risk of sexual assault while they're sheltered. They're not going to be re-triggered or traumatized. And certainly if they're in recovery, that they're going to have the opportunity to continue to recover, to be sober if they want to be sober, or to work on substance use disorder in a different way, in a harm reduction way, if that's their choice. So we're a low barrier shelter. Folks can be sober while they're in, they can be inebriated while they're in the shelter, but they cannot bring drugs or alcohol into the shelter, and that's to respect folks who are sober in the shelter. So we're addressing the needs of a lot of folks in a lot of different ways. It's a very diverse population of people who live there, and so the proposal today is not a proposal to fully fund the shelter. It doesn't expand that program to everybody. We need to have a conversation as a community about what is our goal with regard to homelessness? Is it to shelter everyone? Is it to get everyone housed? I really think that we need a moon landing goal. And a great one would be to ensure that everybody who's chronically homeless is housed, or everyone who's a veteran is housed. Other communities have adopted these types of goals and created plans that will help them get there and benchmarks. So I just wanted to clarify that, because so many people have taken time out of their day to come here and share their story in a really vulnerable way. And I want to set expectations. And be respectful in that regard. Additionally, we've got some ongoing issues with the building. The building that we reside in is a commercial building. There are commercial maintenance and repair costs, and we're not a commercial enterprise. So when we encounter issues like water heaters breaking, doors that break, locks that break, they're more expensive than like regular house repairs or the repairs that other nonprofits have to make. And so it's really crucial that we get those things fixed in a timely fashion in order to, again, ensure that everyone is safe and secure in the shelter. So we're going to use some of this funding to fix the water heater, install a water fountain, which is broken, fix some doors, which are broken, and also increase beds for folks through tax day on those nights when the weather is really cold. So I hope that all makes sense. I'd like to share a little bit about the success that we've had at the shelter over the last 6 months. We did reduce beds at the end of August. All of the beds that were reduced were for individual adults experiencing homelessness, and of course, that's the largest population of people experiencing homelessness in Lawrence. There's a lot of services available for families, and sometimes there's a dearth of services that are available for this population of individual adults on their own who are experiencing homelessness. So we're the primary provider for emergency shelter to those folks. And so we reduced beds on that side of the shelter to 30 at the end of August. We had a successful fundraiser. We raised $75,000. I was able to staff up, and thanks, guys. I was able to staff up, and now we're serving 55 individual men and women a night. So that was really awesome. November and December were some of the best fundraising months that we've ever had. We recruited 282 new donors, which is incredible. We were able to outreach a whole group of new people, and I think that shows how much people in Lawrence really care about this. But I think we really have to convene and have a conversation, set some goals, and all get on the same page about what we're going to do about homelessness. So with that in mind, a couple more really awesome things that are going on at the shelter. We served 503 individuals on the family side and the adult side in 2019 across the whole program year. Our United Way goal that we set for United Way funding was 700. So obviously reducing shelters had in August had a huge impact on the number of individuals we're serving, but we're still producing really great outcomes for those folks. We've shifted to a care coordination model, so we're working with over a dozen community partners in the shelter who are coming into the shelter to provide services to folks who are living there. So we originally predicted that we would provide access to case management or coordinate case management services for 28% of our clients, and we've actually been able to connect 38% of our clients to case management services, which is really great. So we're really satisfied with the transition and the change that we've made in the program model, and we're going to keep working on that to encourage everybody to access a community or supportive service while they're staying in the shelter. I'd love to get that number up to like 90%. I think everybody during their time in the shelter should be able to access a new service. Sometimes it's hard when you come into shelter from the street to overcome trauma, many issues that you're dealing with, distrust of other service providers. Maybe you've been burned in the past by a case manager. You're going through something really, really difficult. And so we have to encourage folks to access services. It's not that we can just make it mandatory, but we want people to understand like what our goal is to help people get housed and to really encourage them to connect with us and connect with their provider in a really lasting, profound way. Let's see, and then the last thing is 68% of the individuals who received coordinated care, meaning they accessed care coordination services or case management services, were exited to housing. So that's a really awesome number. 132 guests exited to housing. Either some of those guests exited to their own permanent housing and some of them exited to a doubled up situation. And it just depends on the needs of folks of which is gonna work better for them. Doubled up doesn't necessarily mean someone's permanently or sustainably housed. It might, but for our purposes, sometimes going to a doubled up situation is a lot better than being in the shelter, so we think it's a positive outcome. So we're really excited about that. We're getting a lot done, and we just really want to make sure, I want to make sure that when we make promises to increase capacity, that we can sustain these types of outcomes, and that it shows that the investment that the community is making in the shelter is delivering a return that's moral, ethical, and also fiscally effective. So for every, people who are chronically homeless are constantly using emergency services. They're constantly interacting with police, whether they want to or not. They're constantly having to go to the doctor because homelessness is really difficult on your health and really difficult on your body. And so it can, various studies have shown that one incident of like allowing someone to be chronically homeless for a year might cost a community $36,000 over the course of the year in terms of how many services they're accessing. When you house somebody, they stop using emergency services all the time. And so you're just paying the cost of their rent or whatever it takes to maintain their housing. So you could save $20,000 a year every time you put somebody who's chronically homeless in housing. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help folks overcome barriers, get housed. At the end of the day, it's a material problem. So we need more rental assistance options. We need more affordable housing options. And all of those things are really going to help the whole community recover. That's basically it. I just did want to report back to you guys on the investment, the supplemental funding that was provided in 2019, and all of the work that was done by hiring SS&C to come out and work with us and think critically about our program model and changes that could be made. And I've worked with Erica Dvorsky throughout the last quarter of 2019 to kind of continue to see that project through. And the other important organizational goal that she outlined for us beyond program model changes and improving our fundraising was also to work on fiscal stability. So we were able to budget this year with your help because of the new level of funding we're receiving in 2020 to start to accrue a cash reserve, which is really, really important for an organization that owns a capital asset as large and as valuable as ours is. So that's going to be really helpful. I'm really hopeful with how great our fundraising went in November and December that we'll be able to exceed that goal. Our plan is to have 18 days of cash on hand, and I'm really hopeful we could get to 30 or more. So really, really excited about that. Is there any questions?
Any questions for Renee?
Renee, I know we talked a little bit about this when you were looking to set up the Lawrence Winter Shelter, but you obviously haven't been there very long. You're looking to hire some new staff, and I saw on Facebook at least you've hired a few staff. And when do you think you'll be operationally at the point that you can expand back up to the 125 to have the managers and the backbone? Is
Right.
that this summer, or is that?
There's no plans to go up to 120 this year. I don't think we'll have the funding in place to go back up to 120 with the new model that we're running. It requires more staff and a higher staff to guest ratio. I'm really committed to seeing that through. And it's crucial for our safety and security and of the guests who work there and the safety and security of the employees of the shelter. So we would need more than $31,000 to be able to do that. It would be a lot more money than that too. And right now at this point, I really am focused on ensuring that we can serve at least 90 folks a night through the rest of the year. I'm not even positive that that will happen. So that's my goal right now. The $75,000 that I raised in November doesn't allow for the 4 or 5 extra staff members I would need to be staffed to hold the capacity at 120 beds throughout the whole year. So,
But absent funding, is your goal operationally to be back at that level? Staff-wise, facility-wise, or is the facility constraints that, absent funding, is your goal to get back to the 120?
I wouldn't be able to do it absent funding.
No, I know, but
Yeah.
if you had the funding, I know with the new model, what I'm not sure about
Yeah.
is, do you have the space? Do you have those sorts of things?
It's a conversation that our board needs to have. Right now, I'm just really concerned with keeping us at 90 beds a night. Yeah.
So the 90 beds, does that include the 15 that are in this proposal tonight?
No, the
That-
15 would
so
be
that in addition?
Yeah, cold weather shelter, coordinating with Christy Hill about those additional 15. And so that would bring us up to 105, and that would just be individual adults. 70 individual adults on nights when the temperatures are falling below 32 degrees.
So by having this funding, it will allow you to keep the shelter open for cold weather events. Is that my understanding?
Yes.
Okay.
And make those couple really crucial fixes.
Yes. So you said it's for cold weather. You said less than 32 degrees. Now I know that your SUP allows you to. They consider cold weather to be less than 40 degrees. Is that something that you would be able to consider?
Sure, yeah, and I'd love to coordinate with Christy, who's running the First United Methodist Church, about that, because I want people to know. One of the folks here mentioned communication, and I think it's really important for folks to know, okay, what nights is this type of shelter going to be available? And so if we're coordinated with Christy, if Christy fills up, then folks can come to us, or if we fill up, then we can send folks to Christy. So that's kind of my, to First United Methodist, so that's kind of my thought. So maybe we could all discuss that.
Yeah, it would be great if you could expand that to the 40 degrees that's allowed in your special use permit. That'd
Okay.
be great.
You requested 15 beds. What brought you to that request, that number?
I think based on the staff that I have now, that's probably the safest option. I conferred with staff. We don't have a separate area in the shelter where we can run this program. And so if folks come in for a night or only a couple nights, it presents a whole new set of security concerns relative to just that new group of people. So trying to make sure we know who is in the shelter, how long are they going to be here, and who needs to leave and when is really important to make sure that people's things don't get stolen, to make sure that people are just being monitored when they're there. So adding 30
beds at this point with the staff that I have. We just cut staff by 30 or 40% in August. So I lost a lot of really good trained staff when we made that reduction. And so I can't now at this point in the winter staff back up with well-trained staff to serve that many folks.
So the 15 isn't sufficient to address the remaining issue, is that what I'm hearing?
The 15 is a manageable number for my staff to reasonably ensure everyone's security while they're in the shelter.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, thanks, Renee. Thanks for
Sure,
taking the
thank
time.
you so much. This is Thea, our board president.
Hello.
Hi, Thea.
So hi, my name is Thea Perry. I am the board chair at the Lawrence Community Shelter, and I'd like to thank all of you for entertaining our funding request. And so for many years, and for a lot of different reasons, I think that's before my time and the time of a lot of you, I think, there's been kind of a tenuous relationship between the city and LCS. But I think that we have all worked really hard to improve that relationship, and I really appreciate that from all of you. So in the spirit of that, I would like to make another request. I'd like to invite the city to appoint a representative member to our board. We have found that having an ex officio member from the county has greatly improved our communication with them. And I believe that having that liaison would be helpful for all of us and strengthen our partnership. So case in point, within the last couple of weeks, we had a commissioner invite us to come and make this funding request. Thank you very much. But we also had a commissioner let us know that they hope that in a few years that the city wouldn't be funding LCS at all. So that contradictory message is confusing for us as we're trying to find our footing, and I think that what we're looking for from the city is a consistent partner that asks for accountability. So we believe that better communication through a board appointment by the city would be in all of our best interests. Thank you.
Any questions for Thea?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, do you have any questions for me?
Is the county ex officio member a staff member, or is it
Yes,
county
it's a staff
commissioner?
member. We'd be happy with a staff member, a commissioner, whoever is willing.
And we previously had a commissioner who was appointed to that, is that correct?
Yes.
Store,
Yes.
okay. And we had pretty specific conversations around commission appointments to boards that aren't city boards. Can you refresh my memory on that conversation? Or not, we can have that conversation another time, we can think about that request, but I know that we had conversation around that, so I think that that will be a continuing conversation.
I think staff probably would be the way to go with that.
Yeah.
I'd be
I think
very
that's
happy to
very
have
reasonable.
whoever you would like. Thank you.
Thank you,
I
Thea.
think Danny's been working on this, hasn't she? Hasn't Danny been working on these issues?
I think we've had a number of different staff that have attended meetings in different capacities. I know I've attended a number of the coordinated care meetings. I think Danny may have also started attending some of them, not in an ex officio capacity on the board, but just to continue to make sure that we were aware of the communication.
Yeah.
And I think we've had the police chief or sergeants or captains that have served on the board in the past too. So it's been any number of different arrangements, but that's what the history I can provide you all.
So yeah, maybe that's a conversation that we can have about that. Okay, any other questions for any of our presenters?
Actually, I did have a question for Thea that I just thought of, if you would please.
Sorry, Thea.
I apologize. I'm a single parent this week, so my 8-year-old is being very patient.
So you were talking about the funding and the message you felt like you were getting as to a commissioner saying come and present, and another one saying hopefully at some point. It seems to me, I remember from the budget session as well as previous years that the community shelter has always indicated to us that they wanted to lessen the amount of funding that they receive from the city. Their goal was to get their fundraising into a point to where it's sustainable, to where they wouldn't have to rely on the city funding, or I don't even know if county funding.
So I think that our goal, as per the recommendations from SS&C, was to reduce back down to about 33% of our funding being from governmental sources, as opposed to what we It used to be, for a long time it was, and then we went all the way up to about 66, 67% in the last couple of years. And so I think our goal at this point is to get back that ratio back down, because that's industry standard.
Yeah, so your goal is to reduce that, that's my understanding.
Yes. Well,
You can come up to the mic, Renee.
My goal is to house people, and I'll take anybody's money. And we need to have a conversation as a community about how we're going to do that. So I'm not going to make any commitment today about what our funding request will be in the spring. I want to move through that process transparently. I want to do it in conversation with you guys. But I don't think it's a good idea for us to make a commitment today about what future funding requests will look like. I really want us to just focus on this one, if that's okay, Thea. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
there's our long-term goals,
Right.
for sure, and then there's what's practical in the next 12 months. And
Okay. All right, so I guess I'm just confused because this is what we heard this summer and historically, and I
So-
understand we've
yes.
got a plan for the future. We need
so
to
again,
discuss
I
the
think
future.
that this is again an issue of communication.
Yeah.
I think that we just need to have better communication between our organization and commission. I think it would be
Yes.
very helpful.
I agree.
And we won't have these.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff, Thea or Renee? Okay, then we will open it up for public comment.
Mayor Ananda and City Commissioners, I'm Karen Frick. My address is 1929 Massachusetts Street. With everything that's been shared tonight, I just am here speaking as a concerned citizen of Lawrence and hearing the outpouring of comments from people and knowing the heart-filled care and concern that we all have. I am asking that the City Commission approve the requested $31,000 needed to reopen the homeless shelter to the, now I understand, 90. I've been given a lot of good information tonight. To use the funds from the supplementary budget. I am also asking the City Commission to consider making an emergency contribution to FUMC, Emergency Shelter at 10th and Vermont, with all of Christie's effort. I realize that many strides have been taken to address the homeless people's needs in Lawrence. The completion of the Crisis and Rehabilitation Center will be a great service when it's completed and it's open. In this moment, the City of Lawrence's abilities to keep people in need of shelter out of the weather when temperatures are below 32 degrees is falling through the cracks. Funding the homeless shelter and FUMC shelters one way we can begin to close this gap. I'm also asking the City Commission to consider contributing additional funds to or establishing an emergency fund that's available for immediate or future unexpected needs for the homeless shelter, possibly also using contingency funds. I thank you all for your service. I thank you all for your time and consideration, because we do have this population. It's not going to go away. It's very complex. There's so many needs to be met, and I know you are embracing the possibilities of how to address that. So thank you.
Alex Rodriguez, 2333 Ridge Court. Renee already gave a good amount of background, but I'd like to repeat some points that were made as well as give my own arguments. At the end of August, the City Commission mandated changes to the operational structure of the Lawrence Community Shelter, which needed additional funding to fully accommodate those changes and maintain its occupancy. When the city refused to provide that funding, the shelter was forced to kick more than 60 vulnerable people back onto the street. With winter coming soon, this was a death sentence for many. Since then, several houseless people have died, many have fallen seriously ill, some have lost limbs to frostbite, and all have been further traumatized by circumstances completely out of their control, but within your control. And for more than 60 people, all of this could have been completely avoided if the city would have fully funded the shelter. For more than 60 people, months of suffering, loss, and trauma could have easily been avoided if the city actually gave a damn about its homeless citizens. For more than 60 people, the City Commission chose to let them die alone and uncared for, while happily handing over more than $1 million to the police department to renovate its offices. Tonight, we say enough is enough. Tonight, we demand meaningful change. No more empty condolences, broken promises, and outright lies. Tonight, we demand that the houseless finally be treated with the concern, care, dignity, and respect that they deserve. Tonight, we demand that the city of Lawrence end its brutal war on the houseless. Tonight, we demand that the City Commission not only fully fund the Lawrence Community Shelter, but that the city itself realize that the real solution to homelessness is housing, not temporary sheltering that can be pulled out from vulnerable people's feet at any time. Thank you.
My name is Yoshi. I live on West 27th. To those of you sitting before me who have served on the previous city commission, you had the chance to prove that you cared, a bare minimum amount of decency, and you couldn't deliver that. Half a year ago, you took away shelter from dozens of people. You effectively evicted over 60 people and tossed them to the wolves, to the cold. You had ample time since August to come up with some sort of emergency winter plan, and you did nothing. It took until after winter had already begun for anyone to start taking action. To those of you who have recently joined the City Commission a few weeks ago, welcome to your job. You govern a city. Many people in your city don't have a home. Lawrence Community Shelter in its current form is wholly unable to function the way it is intended. Funding the shelter to its specifications, the specifications that were determined through a consultant that you hired, is something that would alleviate some of the bare minimum concerns for some people in desperate need this winter. Emergency winter sheltering can only do so much. There's a dedicated facility, despite its flaws, for housing people who have no home. Put it to use. This is the bare minimum demand. Restoring full capacity to LCS is not the end of the houseless issue, and if you are deluded into thinking so, you're mistaken. It is only a minimum request. We're not demanding much, only that the few resources this city once gave to its most vulnerable people are brought back. We demand the shelter be fully funded, full stop.
Stewart, I live on 1515 Ingle Road. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 25(1), requires that everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family. The maxim enshrined by this declaration recognizes the necessity of shelter and the fulfillment of basic needs for a safe and secure life. Ergo, Lawrence must immediately approve the funding request of the Lawrence Community Shelter to provide basic human dignity for all persons and ensure an adequate standard of living for all residents. Houseless shelters are an integral first step in the fulfillment of this goal. Igor Popov from Stanford University writes in a study of federal appropriations to houseless shelters that fully funding these institutions is the most effective method of assisting the most vulnerable. Popov makes the key finding that a permanent increase of $100,000 houses an additional 35 single adults and 11 families. As a result, local governments like Lawrence have an obligation to act not only as the primary fundraiser due to better connection to said communities than the federal government, but also as a continued supporter of the houseless, always willing to increase funds when the need arises. Apathy and incomplete information are the most persistent problems facing efforts to support shelters, and only a responsive city commission can deal effectively with these issues. Once these institutions are fully and continuously supported, Lawrence must focus on programs to protect dignity, life, and the needs of the houseless. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration of the HHS argues that houseless shelters are a crucial starting point, acting as a first response for those going through life crises, whether their health, economic status, or otherwise. They target the root causes of the suffering of the houseless face through an overwhelming focus on empathy and empowerment as the most important priority. The Coalition for the Homeless provides empirical examples of this ethic at work. By putting the needs of people first in cases such as Callahan v. Carey, New York put an end to the cruel fate of forced hypothermia and ostracization many houseless individuals used to face. Lawrence must model this approach and capitalize on the passage of supplementary funding with even more support services and an undying commitment to the protection of the most marginalized. Without an ambitious funding plan, Lawrence will inevitably and tragically fall short of the end goal of permanent housing for every single resident of the city. A 2018 BBC report indicated that 5,200 households were unduly burdened with their financial obligations. Furthermore, 700 households were at risk of becoming homeless. This one-time supply of extra funding is not a move to innocence. It is a very real, necessary, but ultimately measured first step towards a comprehensive policy regime solving the problem of houselessness on multiple levels. If the city does not start here, apathy will prevent it from targeting other problems of housing with any level of effectiveness. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Hamza. I live on 24th. It's January 14th today, the middle of winter, and the shelter hasn't been fully funded for months. There have already been multiple days in the last few months with enough snow out that would prevent most house people from leaving their homes. Even if you decide to finally give the shelter the funding it needs to run at its normal capacity, it will have been too little, too late. People have already had to be out in the freezing cold for numerous days. People have already had to struggle far more than anyone should just to find somewhere to be for a night, something so many of us take for granted. Other people have already said things much better than me, so I just have a little bit to say. You cowards should do your job, fund the shelter, and stop killing people.
Dan Dennenberg, 2702 University Drive. There are some individuals here who have spent at least 6 minutes making their points on this subject. I'm only going to get 3, so I'll have to be brief. Last spring and summer, I went to about 3 meetings on the Coalition for Homeless Concerns, and it soon became clear that it was a joke. The chair of that organization was a noted Lawrence landlord. How somebody's making a joke. It must have been humor that they were trying to point at. The whole thing was just a sham. Attendance was spotty and sparse, and as a result of that, I made 2 requests to the Lawrence Community Shelter for financial disclosures. I made one through a member of the concern on the homeless, the Coalition on Concerns, and one directly to the shelter, and I got nothing. So the shelter knows how that transparency. They take their transparency lessons from the Vladimir Putin book of openness, and I think we need to have a real public disclosure on this. I quit making donations to the shelter because I don't know what's going on. I don't know where the money goes. I don't know anything like that. At one point, while I was serving on the commission or the coalition, I contacted Einstein's in Topeka, and I asked them about, what do you have military surplus sleeping bags or things like that? And he said no. I talked to the manager. He said no. Military surplus sleeping bags are really expensive these days. That's the way the military works. If you get a fighter plane for $35 million, you have to spend $40 million for a sleeping bag. But he said, I think I can make some deals on blankets and sleeping bags that maybe could help out. So I passed this information on to the former director of the Lawrence Community Shelter, and he had never heard of Einstein's. He had no idea. So I don't know what happened to that. I quit going to these meetings because I soon discovered there's a waste of time, and the whole thing was just a joke. And my final comment is, I see a lot of very fancy telephone devices around here. I think maybe there's some money out here that could be put into the Lawrence Community Shelter. Those devices are expensive.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Victoria Kist. I live out on East 14th Street. I want to say that it is a valid point that funding and budgets should be publicly available. I had an extremely difficult time finding districting maps and other information, but that is an issue for another time. The issue at hand is doing immediate funding of $31,000 to the shelter, and I would ask for your support in approving this measure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is KP. So I'm going to talk about events that happened just this past Sunday.
We need to keep our comments focused on the request for $31,000.
Yeah, so this is about the shelter. Yeah, so the shelter that they opened the cold shelter, and so this is kind of like to talk about why we need the extra money to continue funding the cold shelter. So what happened this past Sunday is that there were people who, after leaving the church cold shelter at 7 a.m., it was on a, Z talked about this a little bit before, but on Sundays, the buses don't run at all, and then the library doesn't open till 12, and Link doesn't open till 12 either. So, because they were there at 7 a.m., so there was going to be several hours in freezing temperatures with ice and snow, because that was right after all of the big snow happened. They had nowhere to go. I talked to people around them, and so actually a community member was able to let a lot of people stay in their apartment for several hours. This community member is only 18 and just got off the streets less than a year ago themselves, and a teenager is making more of an effort than all of you. That literally is shameful. Also, you didn't really make any real plans for the emergency cold shelter till it was already too late, and it was already very cold. So kind of like Z said, if it takes you that long to do things, you need to start these plans much, much sooner and make sure you have the money much, much sooner. And so you really need to approve the $31,000 tonight, but also it goes beyond that. So we still need you to repeal 14.417 and 14.418 and then stop the police abuse on houseless people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello again. My name is Audrey Nepstead, and I live on East 14th Street. And I think it's somewhat ironic that I'm asked to give my address when speaking in a city that I live in, and I take residence here, just like all of the people that are homeless, considered houseless. I think it's very ironic. I'd stand with the plea for the $31,000 to go to the homeless center, and I also think it is a good idea to have a liaison working directly with you guys, the commission, and the homeless center, so that more things could be passed and promote the well-being of your city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Matthew Dunn, 5555 West 6th Street. I'm also here on behalf of the Sunrise Movement, so I just want to reiterate that, as someone pointed out earlier, with climate change, these issues are going to be getting worse, and it is the marginalized and houseless population that will be affected the most. I'd also like to point out that the city had a $400,000 surplus in the sales tax revenue, which coincidentally is also how much emergency funding that the community shelter requested last year. So I, of course, supports approving the $31,000. However, I think that you should amend it to go up even higher, given the sales tax increase that the city has received from this past fiscal year. Thanks.
Thank you.
Howdy, my name is Zeke. I live on Vermont Street. Just want to voice support of giving the community shelter the funds they ask for, and like other people have mentioned, going above and beyond, because as we can see, the funding request is very modest, and honestly, even operating at the level that was going on in the past is not wholly adequate to addressing the problem. I don't know how else to put this other than I don't know how you look at a spreadsheet and decide which cell in that spreadsheet, which line on that graph justifies telling people sorry, you're sleeping on the grass tonight. I know it's marshy, I know it's wet, I know it's freezing, but the spreadsheet said so. This shouldn't be this difficult, and it's not like no one is aware of this issue right now. I feel at this point that everyone in the room has probably had enough information and is ready to make a pretty informed decision on going forward and giving people the funding they need to run the shelter and go above and beyond that, I would certainly hope. Again, we need not just a patchwork solution, not just a small solution, but a comprehensive solution. This isn't going to be a one and done thing. This isn't going to be one magic checkbox that solves all of these problems, but we really need to think about how to address these issues comprehensively, and I do genuinely, desperately hope that you all hear this and don't think that this can be resolved in such small, simple, easy, little, just, oh, give a few dollars to the shelter. And I also do want to reiterate something that someone brought up much earlier, that essentially trying to push the idea that just running fundraisers for these essentially just public necessities is somehow sufficient, or saying, oh, well, we can just, if they can raise the funds, that's okay. We shouldn't make a game show out of people's survival. This is a necessity. It is not a surprise that we have a community shelter. It's not something that popped up in the last couple of months. We know what we need, and we know that we need to do more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Susan Ford Lopez again. I wouldn't be clean today if it wasn't for the community shelter and me being able to take showers there. It's the only time I get a hot bath, My attacker is going to be out in 72 hours, okay? Normally, when this stuff happened to me when I was with him and the willow was full, I would go to the shelter for my 72 hours that you were allowed there. Okay, I don't have that option. The willow's full, and the shelter's not funded, so I can't go there. Even, it's only 72 hours, I can handle the bed bugs. They don't have bed bugs anymore. I would be there. Terry would be there if the shelter was funded, and he wouldn't have lost his feet. His toes. Technically, right now, all I know is his toes, but they got a surgeon coming in. I wouldn't be, I don't want to be on the streets. I really don't. I have no idea. I have nothing. He destroyed my wallet and he tried to murder me. Okay? I'm not from here. My ID is from Oklahoma. I'm born in California. You know how hard it is? Any of you, please, try and get an ID without nothing. Without anything. And be from out of state. It's impossible. Except for going to jail. Well, I've never been to jail because I don't get in trouble because I don't do bad things. Because I'm not a bad person. I have never been in trouble here. Never. In all the years I've lived here. So I can't do that. And I actually purposely tried to break the law just to get me a ticket so I wouldn't go to court so I could get a damn ID. So I could get off these streets. So, and I don't care what anybody says. I've been here too many years. I've been here almost 4 years now. I am a resident. Whether anybody, I don't care who or where, on Facebook or anyplace else, I am a resident of Lawrence. I live here. If you would give the Woods an address, I'd have one. It's like a rural area. I'd go to the post office to pick up my mail. I would have an address. And then the shelter needs to be funded. Because I would be in the shelter without, they don't have bed bugs anymore. I would be there, and they could help me with they would help me. I'd have a caseworker. I'd have hope. I don't have any hope. I wake up every morning just trying to survive. If I could be at the shelter, I wake up every morning, okay, I got this appointment, I got that appointment. This is progress. I'm 15 years old, I'm way too old to be doing this. And I've been doing it for 4 years. Never before in my life have I ever been homeless. So I'm an old lady doing something I ain't never done before. But I'm doing it and I'm living. And obviously other people that I actually care about aren't living. They're not making it. And I choose the fact that I am old and I was raised in a different era.
Thank you, Susan.
Please, refund the shelter. Give them the money they need. Not for the 15. Give them the money to open it back up. Please.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chris Flowers, and I would just like to bring a different aspect, is that what kind of legacy will it have on each of your, of you as a commissioner if you vote against this, especially after this summer when the shelter was told, well, if there's money, extra money from the sales tax, that they'd be considered at least. I mean, if you vote against this, I think it's fair game for me from now on to refer to any commissioner that votes against it as the commissioner that voted against the homeless. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay. Regan.
As I stated again, my name is Margaret. I resonated with that woman that just spoke. I've seen her. She's always been kind to me. I vouch for people who are kind human beings. And I was once not so kind. And I can admit that. But on a lighter token, I've adopted principles that have served me well. And while you guys may think that people on the side of homelessness are either dangerous or maybe even mentally ill, that's not always the case. I have found that very many people are just despaired. You can fall into a deep depression and not know what to do. And it takes a lot of me to stand here. I don't know many of you. This is my first town hall meeting, but I used to walk here with my mother every month and pay bills with her. And at one point, I was the sole provider. Now, I don't even know where my next rent check is going to come from. And that, to me, is absolutely disgusting. It hurts. Poverty hurts. If you guys knew, it would shock the hell out of you. And I say that because there's a special place in hell for people who don't care about human beings and animals. And whatever's in heaven, angels walk among us. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we will bring it back up to the commission. I do want to remind everyone that we do have the funding request policy for mid-year funding requests and the 2 assessment method questions that if in your comments, maybe we can make sure to address.
Well, I'll start. I mean, if you look at the policy, I mean, certainly the 31,000 is easy. I mean, fills an existing gap in city services. We clearly have a gap. A community goal, it's clearly a community goal to help the houseless. Provides a need for the community that's otherwise unmet, easily checked. Helps leverage outside funds. I mean, the shelter raised $75,000 in November. So it's certainly a leverage there. I'd also say it leverages the winter shelter. The winter shelter has opened at the Methodist Church. We've raised about $10,000 to run that through April. Because it's run mainly by volunteers in Christie, it's going to, serve its purpose. But again, it's only a overnight shelter, as several people mentioned. You know, we don't open the doors until 8:30, and then they leave at 7 a.m. Again, it's leveraging that kind of funds. We know we've had last count, as of Sunday night, we had 42 different individuals come through the winter shelter. So even it holds 15 folks. If we have 15 here, we're still at least 11 spots short of the ones that have been through the shelter, through the winter shelter since we opened. So clearly there's an unmet need. And again, neither of those shelters, this 31,000 or the winter shelter, addresses some of the things that some of the speakers talked about and Renee talked about, which is providing caseworkers and providing ways out. It's just a place to keep them out of the cold. So anyway, I mean, to me, the 31,000 is the easy part. I certainly would support, as we certainly support future requests to fill that gap as we move forward. The gap is going to be there, and it certainly remains there. And so, anyway, I think it easily meets these funding questions, guidelines, and the assessment methods. So I certainly support the request.
Yeah, I support the request. I had met with Renee a few weeks ago and asked her to bring a proposal to us, given our situation with our sales tax, end of year sales tax numbers. So I'm definitely in support of this. I do believe that it provides a need in the community that right now is unmet. And so as far as our mid-year funding request policy, I think the guidelines that are provided, that it does meet at least that aspect of it. And I do think it's a high priority for justification of those funds. So,
during the recent campaign, I took the position that local government funding for the community shelter is the responsibility of Douglas County rather than the city of Lawrence. And that's based upon my understanding of the Kansas Constitution and our state statutes. A vote against this proposed funding would therefore require little explanation, just a reference to my position during the campaign. A vote in favor, however, requires more explanation. I maintain my position that the Constitution and statutes place this obligation on Douglas County rather than the city. Over the years, though, the city's provided more funding to the community shelter than the county has. What goes largely unrecognized is that this places a double burden on our city taxpayers. We've supported the community shelter through our city taxes as well as through our county taxes. If Douglas County provided all of the local government funding, then Lawrence property owners would still be paying 75% of that amount through our county taxes. This is a change that needs to be made. As I advocate, though, I realize that incremental change is what our community may accept. With all of this in mind, and with appreciation for the leadership of Commissioner Larson, I support this proposed funding.
The only thing, I agree with what Brad said. One thing I did want to add to that about the leverage, there was one bit of correspondence, I don't know if everyone got it, I'm going to assume that we all did, was someone who had supported the shelter in the past, and as things were reorganizing, had become less comfortable, but felt more comfortable knowing that the city was investing. And I thought that was an important point that she made, that, again, with the fundraising that they've done, we also send a message that we support them, and that can also be a help for people who are interested in giving funds. So in terms of leverage, that's one thing I wanted to add.
So in looking, at the request high enough priority, absolutely, I think in this moment, this is absolutely the right thing to do. I think that when we're talking about the long-range implications, we do have to seriously question that. So I will start by saying that I do support this piece. I think that when we're continuing that conversation, we have a lot more to consider. as we're looking at, the fact that we have several hundred nonprofit organizations in this community, and many of them are providing life essential services like our domestic violence shelter, mental health services, substance abuse services, children's programs, sexual violence, trauma services, et cetera, and all of them are not fully funded. All of them are experiencing budget issues. And so as we talk about this long term, as we talk about how we support our nonprofit organizations in our communities, we have to acknowledge that there are a lot of really amazing people doing really amazing things on lots of really integral and important and life-saving topics. And they all need to be part of that conversation. And we have to acknowledge the intersectional nature of all of these issues as we're having these conversations and talking about the city's budget. We have several organizations that we support every year. And how are we doing that? And how are we doing that equitably and effectively in the most effective way that we can? Because we can't fully fund all of these. And we have to prioritize very carefully, I think. So I say that with the understanding of, we talk about the sales tax projections being higher than we projected. That isn't a profit. There are so many things that we have not funded. There are so many organizations and social service agencies, but also, potholes not filled and sidewalks not maintained for safe routes to school and things like that. So I think that those are important pieces of those conversation as well. So again, I'm completely in support of the request from the shelter. I think that we have to think very seriously about the long-term implications as we have these conversations.
Can I just add something? Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I guess that, I appreciate you saying that and talking about the long-term ramifications. And I think that there was one speaker who got up, Margaret, I believe her name was, and one thing that she said that struck me is that the poor communication we have had between the city and the shelter and just the community as a whole. And I think that kind of bows to that is that we need to have just a much more thorough discussion about all of our social service funding. Because you're right, we don't fully fund most of them that have the request. But I also like to go back and talk about what Commissioner Boley said regarding the Constitution, and I believe also that what the Kansas Constitution says is that it is a county function, but that should be a conversation between us and the county, and it should not impact the lives of those who are out there that are houseless. And that should be a separate conversation. We need to protect them, but at the same time, we take an oath, every single one of us take an oath to follow the Kansas Constitution, the United States Constitution, and Kansas law, as well as the county commissioners. So we need to continue to have that conversation at a staff level and the commission level, but not do everything we can to not let that impact the everyday person who is struggling in our community.
Well, I would certainly agree with the second part. I mean, obviously it's a conversation we can continue to have. I certainly don't agree with the interpretation of the Constitution that it's the duty of the county, but we can have that conversation a different day. I do think, I do agree with one of the things Renee said is that this conversation shouldn't be about, dollars and cents or this amount or that amount. It should be having a conversation about how we're going to solve this problem and then what funds are necessary to meet that problem. Because it's, and I guess I didn't know his name was Terry. Terry was at, the winter shelter on Sunday night. He had just been released from KU Med, had his toes amputated, and he was staying, on the floor at the Methodist Church. That's not the way we should be treating folks. And so I think it is a much bigger conversation we have to have and continue to have. I certainly know we're going to be talking about it in the 2021 budget, which is coming up soon, but there's a lot of need there, and as some of the folks said tonight, the conversation needs to start a lot earlier and not wait till the budget season.
Anyone else? Do we have a motion?
I move for approval of the mid-year funding request from the Lawrence Community Shelter for supplemental funding in the amount of $31,000 for 2020.
Second.
Motion from Vice Mayor Finkeldye, second from Commissioner Larson. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. I would like to move through the rest of the regular agenda items, and then we'll take a break if everyone is okay with that. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so we will move on to commission items. Any other commissioners have future agenda items to add? I would like to request that we bring back the 2 ordinances that were mentioned this evening regarding camping as well as aggressive panhandling. Just to review those, look at, my question was, if we're not enforcing those, is it time to reconsider what that looks like at the very least, or consider repealing them as well? Would other commissioners be interested in having that conversation?
I'd like to get a understanding of the history of the ordinances.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would that be a study session that you would prefer in that?
I just want to get that information as part of whatever we talk about, whether it's a study session or work session. I mean,
Yeah, I thought we
regular
already
agenda.
put that on the future agenda items, but maybe I'm wrong.
I don't know that we formally did.
Okay. That's something things worth talking about.
Yeah, I understood you to mean that, and I thought but we didn't put a timeline on it, so I didn't know when to expect it. But
Does staff have any thoughts on whether that would be a study session item, a regular agenda item, and a timeline?
I think it absolutely is a study session item until we get clarity on what kind of modifications you'd like to make. Background and history, I think we can prepare a good kind of a briefing document that will give you that background and history and kind of a state of this is how communities are dealing with these 2 particular issues. And that should be a point where we can at least have a conversation, and then maybe you can direct whether or not you want to see specific changes and modifications within the ordinance or repeal. So I think it is definitely a discussion session.
Do you have thoughts on what a timeline might be for that study session?
I think 30 days for us to do the review and give you the background and get it on so in February, we'd expect. And it will probably share some discussion item space.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other future agenda items? Work session items? Other items?
Two other items, I guess. I would like to figure out if we're going to have a staff member if we're willing to have a staff member on the ex officio on the board of the LCS. I know you guys made some changes. I've served on lots of nonprofit boards. I'd be happy to be on the board, but I think you made some changes, so we couldn't do that. But I do think it would be helpful to have one staff member who regularly attends those meetings as an ex officio member, not someone that shows up and just follows what's going on. So I hope we look into that.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's no objections, we'll just go ahead and move forward on that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
The other one I was just going to mention is I did the ribbon cutting today for the Jayhawk experience, which is really cool. They've now opened up Allen Fieldhouse and the locker rooms and a lot of those things for tours. The person they hired to run that used to run an NFL, opening up NFL stadiums and activities, and they're going to work hard really to open up the facilities. You can now rent all the facilities for an office party or an event that we want to have, and Michael was there from Explore Lawrence, and they're going to do a lot, I think, to combine that, but it's a really big deal to open up. I remember taking my family there, and they peeked through the windows because you couldn't get into Allen Fieldhouse. Now you can walk in and get not only Allen Fieldhouse, but all the tours. So it's a great experience, and I'm looking forward to adding it to the list of things you can do in Lawrence.
Any other items? Okay, then we will move on to the calendar.
I will be at the Martin Luther King breakfast. I don't know if anyone else will be there,
I'm
but
hoping to go.
I'm hoping
Yes.
to as well.
I'll be there.
so need to add that.
There's also the the chili feed.
Yeah, that would be a good thing to add.
That's
as
a quick
well.
bowl of chili before a meeting.
In April, I just got an email from Casey today, the GARE conference. It's in April. Sorry, I'm forgetting the dates. 14th through the 16th. And I think that's a conversation to have because that would be on the night of a work session. That
What's the conference?
it is, sorry. Y'all haven't been here. And I'm throwing around acronyms. Okay, it's the Governmental Alliance on Race and Equity. It's an organization that the city joined last year, and Casey and I actually had the opportunity to attend that original, and their annual meeting is, I think, the technical term for that. And it was really informative and really useful. It's a relatively new organization in the grand scheme of nonprofits. However, it has grown exponentially, and several communities have come together to talk about how do we address the issue of race? How do we center race? How do we have real conversations about race as a municipality, as a city, as a community, as a county? So I found it incredibly useful. I would like to attend this again this year. However, I think that is a conversation as well for us all to have. But I want to acknowledge that it is on the night of our work session on the 14th as well.
As a side note, I know there's going to be, not a side note, but just something we can walk through if we do something. The night of the 14th, there'll be 12 or 14 people from our sister city in Greece. They're coming from the 10th through the 19th. So that was the one city commission meeting. I think they were going to try to be here to say hi. But we can, I mean, if we don't end up having that, we can come up with another venue in which to talk with them. But I just wanted to put that out as I looked at the calendar. But it sounds like a good conference. I'm not opposed.
It's phenomenal. Okay, well, we'll let that sit for a while and bring that back at another time.
There's one thing, Commissioner Larson had been attending the meetings of stakeholders for the cost of growth study, and I went to one meeting, and then we weren't sure how that was, if I was going to get elected. We didn't know I was going as a land representative, and it looks like they have another meeting coming up, and so I wanted to figure out, are more than one of us allowed to go to that? How do we want to navigate that meeting?
Two can go anywhere.
I didn't know if someone else was interested. I didn't want to steal the space.
Should we put it on the calendar?
Let's put it on the calendar.
Yeah, it's put on the
Is that public space?
The cost of growth meeting.
It's here.
It's at the chamber.
Is it? Oh, I thought I read that it was.
Did they move it? They might have moved it. I don't know.
Maybe I got old information.
So we should look into that and then potentially add it to the calendar.
When is it, or let me
What's
do
it,
the
one?
dates. We can find it. I just
Yeah.
didn't know if someone knew off the top.
I thought it was next week. Thursday, maybe.
Not finding it? Okay, yeah, if we can find that out. Thank you. Anything else, calendar-wise? All right, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn?
Second.
Come on.
Motion from Vice Mayor Finkeldye, second from Commissioner Shipley. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, passes unanimously. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we will return for our work session. Okay, we are back. And we are ready for our work session. We are set to receive a presentation about the downtown master plan from Haskell Levine Associates regarding vision statements and goals and objectives memorandum.
Good evening, Commissioners. Amy Miller, Interim Planning and Development Services Director. We have the consultant here tonight, and we are excited to present to you the existing conditions summary. Haskell Levine is here, and they are prepared to give you a presentation, and then there'll be some time for some questions and any other further information that you would like. We are halfway through the project at this point, and the next steps will be to go to work drafting the actual plan. So with that, I will turn it over to Nick Davis with Haskell Levine.
Thanks, Amy.
Nope. Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for giving us the opportunity to meet with you tonight and go over this. We have a couple of different things. We have a couple of different things we want to go over, as Amy had said. We want to talk about the existing conditions report, and that's going to kind of tee up what we've been doing, what we found up to this point. And then I'll explain kind of where we want to go next within this existing conditions report. And then we also want to talk about the vision and the guiding principles. So these are two different deliverables, one presentation tonight. Would like to get some feedback on both of them. So as I go through this, what I'd like to do is go through the existing conditions report in its entirety. Any questions you may have there, we'll talk about it. And then we'll start talking about the vision and guiding principles. Any questions you may have, we'll talk about it. And then we'll talk about next steps. So those are kind of the three components, what we want to go through. So the existing conditions analysis, and as this report introduces it, it talks about the purpose, what we're trying to accomplish. Essentially, this is the kind of the baseline, the foundation for the plan's recommendations that we're going to start moving into. So up in this point, this document that you're reviewing does not include recommendations, does not include the ideas or what we want to do next. It just tells you kind of what the story is, what the challenges are, maybe what some of the opportunities are, but not necessarily how we're going to go about that in the plan. We do define the regional settings where we're at in context to the region, where the downtown is located. We define the boundary, so Tennessee on the west, you have Rhode Island on the east, Perry on the north, and South Park on the south. We did review several plans, not just this list, but several plans that have been done in the past, anything that's relevant to the downtown, anything that might impact not just our understanding of the area, but also what the plan's recommendations might be. So as far back as the original 1981 plan and as current as the 2019 recently adopted 2040 comprehensive plan. We've conducted quite a few different outreach events, and we describe it in kind of a summary form here. At the end of this document, there's a complete and kind of full summary of all the different outreach. And that's in the appendix. So if you want to know even more about those events, that's in the appendix. But we conducted in person, so we did community workshops, business workshops, downtown and adjacent neighborhood workshops, focus groups. We had DIY kits. We had 5 different groups fill out these DIY kits. We recently did, back in November, a visioning workshop. And then we have some outreach still to come. That includes a student workshop that's going to be conducted by staff. And as well as we have an online survey, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Overall, we've had 300 workshop participants, 833 residential surveys, which is a really good turnout for a community of this size. 38 business property owners, 29 youth and student surveys. As I mentioned, 5 DIY kits, and 45 maps on our online map, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Overall, that's about 1,230 participants, give or take. So again, that's a very good turnout for this type of project, community of this scale. The community outreach that we conducted that was online included the project website itself. We had online questionnaires. Map.social is an online mapping tool, allows people to engage online. And then a visual preference survey. And this visual preference survey is still live. So if you talk to anybody who wants to participate, this is a way they can still participate. It'll give us a sense of the types of buildings, built forms, streetscape characters, what people would like to see in the downtown. It'll help inform our recommendations in the plan. So onto the existing conditions analysis. The first thing that we looked at were the demographics. I'm not going to go into this in detail. If there are questions, we can come back to this. Our goal here was to summarize what the population trends are, taking those into considerations. I'd say the main thing to take away from the demographics, and then even as we get into the market, is you have 33,000 people is going to be that growth, that population here in Lawrence over the next, I think that's projected out to 2030, 2040. That's a significant number, and a large percent of that is going to be in the downtown, or a portion of that is going to be in the downtown. So we want to make sure that the plan's recommendations can accommodate that growth in residential population. The age distribution, you can see that there is a younger population in Lawrence compared to that of the region. The labor force, I think one thing that's significant is, unlike many of the communities that we work in, there's a lot of people that both live and work in the community. Sometimes you see that distribution broken out a little bit more, and more people work outside of the community that they actually live in. You do have a large concentration of people living here in the community that work here, which is great. That's something to continue to see as a trend, or continue to promote. We go through race and ethnicity. We talk about the household income. We talk about education, or educational attainment. So those are the issues that we've talked about inside of the demographic snapshot. As part of the market snapshot, we looked at retail, office, and multifamily. So of those three categories, we used the retail, the 2018 retail market study, or market report that was conducted by the city. We pulled out some of those key findings that are relevant to the downtown, just to kind of break them out, make them a little bit more clear about how the downtown plan is going to need to respond to those numbers. Some of the additional aspects that we looked at were the office. We used some supplemental data sources. We used CoStar, which gave us a good sense of how many offices are in the downtown, what those vacancy rates are. So again, I'm not going to throw a bunch of numbers at you. If we have questions, we can come back to this. And then we also pulled some data for the multifamily, which I do think is going to have a significant impact on the types of uses that we think are appropriate as we start to move forward and give plan recommendations about how you're going to accommodate these residents that ultimately are going to be in the downtown in the future. So as I mentioned, the overall market implications, the big things to talk about: 33,000 people by 2040. That downtown population is going to increase. So there has to be a way that the downtown can accommodate it. And currently, it wouldn't be able to pick up that overall number. And just making sure that that kind of coincides with some of the recommendations that are in the 2040 comprehensive plan. The figure ground just shows a sense of what the built form is in the downtown, what the consistent street wall is. There's an additional graphic that shows that. We looked at the building height. The range of buildings here are fairly significant. There's a strong character relationship between the building heights, what it feels like to move through this space. The street wall, as I mentioned, we met with the steering committee yesterday, and I think the street wall is something that's very unique to this community. To have such a consistent street wall along Mass Street is really something that you have to make sure that you maintain in the future. I think that's something that sets you apart from many, many communities who don't have that. You know, often you have access to parking or access to other uses that might be set back. You have a very consistent street wall. That's what that blue line is showing. And then even along Vermont and New Hampshire, there's still a fairly consistent street wall as new development's gone in and as existing development is still there. So just something that as we move forward, we'll keep in mind, and we don't want to lose that street wall, and we don't want to compromise the built form, something that's very special to Lawrence downtown specifically. The existing land use, we looked at all the different uses that make up the downtown. It's a very comprehensive breakout of these land uses. We even took it a step further. So the land use that you see here, that red is mixed use. That mixed use would include several uses beyond just what's on the ground floor. So maybe the ground floor is commercial or office, and the upper floor is residential. We felt like it would be helpful if you could see what that looked like. So these subsequent maps just show you what the breakouts are. If it exists on the ground floor, exists on the upper floor, you see it. So you see where residential is, commercial and retail, bank and office, restaurant, bar and brewery, entertainment. So I think that's a good way to not just look at the overall land use, but also kind of what's the makeup of all those, so you can see some of those recurring uses. The current zoning we reviewed. We used the city's online interactive map. We were able to do some assessments on what those current zoning districts are, what those impacts are going to be as we start to move into the actual plan recommendations. That's land use and zoning are two real fundamental impacts to what you can do, how you can develop, what things will look like. So we did a review of the current zoning districts. That also included looking at the downtown urban conservation overlay, which we describe in a little bit more detail here. Community facilities, we talk about this later, but the downtown, it really is the heart of the community. There's a lot of community facilities down here. You have over 15 community facilities that are in the downtown, which is pretty significant. You have the museums, Lawrence Art Center, City Hall, the library, and several others. So I think just keeping that in mind, that these are the types of uses that are appropriate and should be here, and you want to continue to see those here. That's something that we'll talk about inside the plan. We talk about the farmers market. That is definitely something we heard quite a bit throughout the outreach. At the public workshops, online residential questionnaires, a real concern about what's the future of the farmers market, where's a permanent location going to be. We know that the city had done their farmers market scan, and that's something that we talk about. We've reviewed it. We know that as we move this forward, we're part of that discussion about maybe what some of those potential locations look like, what some of those facility needs are, and we'll talk quite a bit about that, or we'll at least give some ideas about what you can do inside the plan. There's also other events, though. There's quite a few significant events that occur in the downtown. Again, that's something that you want to promote. You certainly create a vibrant community when that's existing. So just continuing to develop that over the years is something that the downtown's going to have to keep doing. Public safety, we talk about the police department, the fire, any of those fire and safety facilities that are in the downtown. The energy, we talk about the Bowerstock, Evergy, their locations and what their roles are in the downtown. Lawrence universities, so outside of our scope, for sure, in terms of what the downtown is and what its boundary is, but the University of Kansas and the Haskell Indian Nations University, they do contribute. They are a part of this community. You do want to see connections to the downtown. So it's not that we're going to be providing recommendations about what they should be doing. It's more so what the downtown could do to maybe tie into those great institutions and just make sure that they're not a forgotten asset and something that we'll certainly be looking at. Homelessness and social equity. I think as we talked about yesterday with the steering committee, and as we really continue talking about this throughout the process, it won't be the job of this downtown plan to solve these issues, but they certainly will need to address them. And there's some challenges in there that we know that we need to be part of this discussion. This master plan needs to be a part of the discussion. I think some of the key themes that we've been talking about throughout this process is, that inclusiveness, affordability, what those safety concerns are. All those different aspects are things that as we start to provide recommendations that are either specific to these issues or that might address these issues or have some kind of role or some kind of variable in it. We're very aware of that. We know those are just ongoing challenges that the city's facing at a larger level as well. So we'll be sure to incorporate that into the master plan. Historic resources, quite a few historic resources in the downtown. Again, something that, as we know this, and these are obviously facilities that you're aware of, we always find it important. You just want to make sure you don't lose those assets. You don't lose sight of their important contribution to the community, and then also how new development needs to respond to that, maybe reflect it, incorporate some of those themes. Those are the types of issues that we'd like to address in the master plan. So looking at the National State Register of Historic Places, as well as the local Register of Historic Places, and coordinating with staff on that will be important. Parks and open space, we won't be providing recommendations about any real significant changes to the parks. I think the important thing is to know that they're great assets that you have. They're good connections into the downtown. In some ways, they serve as buffers or transitions into the residential neighborhoods. I don't foresee, a big park expansion or anything like that as part of the master plan, but making sure that people can connect to them, making sure that you're able to move through them, that there are these assets that the downtown is able to leverage or take advantage of is an important factor. The balance on that as well is there's some open space, so spaces that aren't necessarily programmed, might be more passive in nature. Along the river is a good example of that, as well as some of the spaces like between the library and the library's parking decks, a good example of open space. It's somewhat programmed, but it's also passive in nature as you start to move further north. Like I said, along the river, there's some open spaces that are right there by the the Welcome to Lawrence sign. So it's building off of those. Those are nice spaces that you want to encourage in the future. You'd like to see more of those. They might be smaller in scale, but that's okay. So we talk about pocket parks or pocket plazas. Those are things that we'll talk about. The Kansas River, also probably one of the top 5 issues or comments that we heard from the public was, how do you access the Kansas River? We talk about that a little bit more in this report. It has proved to be a critical issue. People want to have access to it. They want safe access to it. They want easy access to it, and those are things that we're going to explore. The environmental features. I think the key takeaway here is you have a great tree canopy, throughout the frontage on the river, as well as even throughout just the downtown itself. There are some areas that are prone to flooding, so those are things that we'll make sure we're very aware of as we start to talk about development that might occur, not in it, but even adjacent to it, make sure that there's no negative impacts. Some of the steep slopes, I see those more as assets than challenges. It was just something that we wanted to make sure we mapped and we acknowledged. The roadway network, the principal arterials, as you're coming in off of 2nd, as you head west, those are the principal arterials, so that bright red. Most of the downtown is made up of collectors. You have several signalized intersections, which are the blue circles. You have a couple of minor arterials that are heading out to the west, and then also down on 11th and Mass, that's south of 11th. Something that we talk about here, but we talk about in more detail later, is the mid-block crossing. I think that's a fantastic asset. You have multiple installations of them, and the more that you have of those, the more common, the more regular they are to people, the safer those installations are. So I think there's some improvements that could happen to those in the future, and we'll talk about that, but that's certainly something that you want to build off of. The traffic counts we pulled from KDOT, and we did an assessment on what those numbers look like. So you have 22,000 people coming over the bridges. You have 4,000 that are coming down or going up Vermont on a daily basis, 12,000 that are going up or down New Hampshire. So those are fairly substantial numbers for a downtown, and something that, and then 13,000 going down Mass. Something that you just got to be sure that we accommodate as we start providing recommendations about how pedestrian moves through here, how cars move through here, how a cyclist might move through here, and those are things that we'll be addressing. We did break out the functional classifications to give a more detailed explanation of like what principal arterials are, collectors, local roads, private roads, alleys. The jurisdiction, the only thing that's operated by KDOT is 2nd and 6th, so the bridge. Everything else is operated by the city of Lawrence. Except for those two in red. The red that you see on the west side of the map, that's the bank's property. They have 2 drives that go through there. And then the one that you see on the west, on the east, just south of the river, is the Riverfront Plaza. They have like a looped parking lot. Otherwise, the city is responsible. That's important to note, because a lot of the improvements that we're going to want to talk about later on in the master plan can sometimes be contingent on who owns this, whose jurisdiction this is, what rights do they have to make these changes. So this is I see this as a positive and something that we can use to move forward. We identify the truck routes. I don't foresee any changes to the truck routes as I've seen them utilized here in the community. They seem to function well. I don't feel like we ever heard, so unless this commission has any additional, we really didn't hear any feedback through the public or through the steering committee that there's a challenge there. There might be some like peak loading times that we want to address, but that'd be about it. The pedestrian network is thorough through the downtown. More than 95% of the downtown is served by a sidewalk. There might be some improvements that need to happen to some of those sidewalks, and we'll talk about that. But in terms of an actual dedicated space for a sidewalk and where that is, the downtown's well served. The residential neighborhoods coming into the downtown are well served. Like I said, I think it comes back to maintenance and maybe improvements or new installations. The mid-block crossings, I think, are something to build off of. They're significant along Mass Street in terms of just breaking up the block, controlling the speed, controlling the traffic, but also giving pedestrians an opportunity to cross. The unimproved side, or the unimproved crosswalk versus the improved crosswalk. So the improved crosswalks are the red, the blue is the unimproved. There aren't that many unimproved crosswalks, and that just means that they have a different painting style or a different designation. That might be something that we'll explore as well. The intersections and crosswalks, hawk signals, mid-block crossings, pedestrian cut-throughs. The good news is you have all of these features. Many of the downtowns or communities that we work in, they don't even have these to begin with. So this is a good launching point. Like I said, I could anticipate it really just being more like upgrade, updates, maybe a modernization or a different approach to how they've been installed. But the fact that they're there is a good starting point. The pedestrian cut-throughs are probably the best example. Now that they're there, I think that's something that you can build off of. I think it's just promoting them, making them a little bit, as someone who's not from here, they weren't obvious to me what they were going to, and that I'm even supposed to be there. So I think as you start to improve those in the future, those could become, even greater assets than they are now, and they could be really cool spaces. They could look very different. The bike network, just building off of some of the plans that are already in place from the city's perspective, we identify the existing marked shared lanes, which are in blue. There are proposed or future bikeways that are planned for. Those are along 2nd. You see there's one along even shown along Mass Street and New Hampshire. I think as those continue, or as we continue to move down the path of writing recommendations, we'll coordinate with staff. We'll again be reviewing some of their plans that they identified within the 2040 comprehensive plan, and just make sure that we're connecting everything. One of the things I wanted to talk about is the Lawrence Loop, which is on the next page. That's a significant connection that, really one portion of that is in the downtown, and seeing that connection made and giving this overall loop throughout the community is fairly significant. And I think we'll continue to come up with some ideas about how that connection is going to be made, what that tie-in looks like, and how even the downtown can take better advantage of that once it's done, because I think that connection will be very important. This is one of the looks of kind of looking out over the bridge where that connection might occur. In terms of bike storage and bike amenities, there are a substantial amount of bike facilities in the downtown, bike parking. It's over 1,500 according to the city's database. They are scattered throughout as new bikes, and this is something that the steering committee had talked about last night, as new bike routes are installed. I think the adjustment on where some of those spaces or where some of those parking opportunities for bikes occur might need to be considered, but I would say as those are coming in, that might be something that you're responding to. So you're adding these spaces in as there's a demand for them. Transit, well served in the downtown with the hub there. Again, a lot of communities have moved away in some aspects of having this hub in their downtown. I think the fact that it's here, it puts a center of gravity in the downtown. It's a very active facility, at certain times of the day, brings in a lot of people. You see a lot of people walking or getting to the bus. So again, just building off of that, I think is something that's very important and we'll take into consideration. The rail, both what's on the north, up by the old station, and then the Amtrak to the east of downtown, and just making sure that those are tied or connected to the downtown. There's not much that we would recommend or change, for what's up around the original rail station. But certainly as you want to talk about the neighborhood and how they're going to connect over from the Amtrak station, there's some opportunities there. Shared mobility, that's something we talked about a little bit last night. So the ride share, be it through Lyft or Uber, it really does change the way people are able to access the downtown. It's a non-traditional approach. It gives people more opportunity, safer opportunities. We talked about the Lawrence bike share program. The fact that they're dockless, that gives you a lot more accessibility, a lot more fluidness. And then we talked about e-scooters. We know the city's currently working on a policy for e-scooters, and that's something that, as that continues to evolve from the city standpoint, we'll make sure to fold that into the master plan's recommendations. There's a lot of different ways to go about e-scooters, so that's something we'll coordinate and make sure that we're on the same page. Public parking, public and private parking. This map identifies in light blue is where all the private off-street parking is. In darker blue is where all the public off-street parking is. And then what's yellow is where some of the parking decks are. So as you can see, the downtown has several parking options. I would say throughout the community outreach, we heard that there wasn't, maybe enough parking at certain times of the day, or maybe what was 2 hours should be 10 hour, what's 10 hours should be 2 hour. Those are the balances that when we look back at the previously conducted the parking study, we'll just make sure to fold in those recommendations, and that we're looking at that as we start to talk about this, because parking was definitely, like I said before, that's probably one of the top 5 issues that we heard about. But there's also some opportunities on some of these city-owned parking lots, so that's something that we need to address. I would say one of the challenges that we face is the perception of parking. So how do you find where parking is? Is it easy to get to? Is it clear to know how many open spaces there might be? These are the types of things that we'll explore, both for on-street parking, but also off-street parking. I think a lot of that's going to come back to signage, not just the actual lot itself, but getting you there, so if it's directional or wayfinding. For the streetscape, we broke this down into a couple of components. We looked at where some of the key intersections are that are 4-way intersections, and where those might be potentially enhanced in the future. We started to break these down into zones, some functional zones. So the dark green is what is that Mass Street streetscape. And that's looking at everything inside that public realm. So from building frontage to building frontage, what's happening inside of that streetscape. Then you have the purple, which is 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th. So those are east-west transitions. And again, just doing this for all of them. And I would say this is probably how we'll move forward inside the master plan, using these functional sub-areas to give recommendations about what should happen on Mass, what should happen on these east-west, what's going to happen on Vermont and New Hampshire, what happens on 6th, and then Mass south of South Park. So I think breaking these into zones, They should talk to each other. They should be interrelated. They should share a similar look and feel, but they may have a lot more complexity on Mass Street versus what you have on 6th. So that's something that we'll look at. Also take into consideration these approaches, these routes. These key approaches into the community are something to be considered, built off of. You have several large, like key or main approaches to the community coming from the north on 2nd, the south on Mass, and then some east-west connections. The gateways, wayfinding, those are just doing a good job of taking the city's brand and implementing that through all these different dedicated locations. So gateways might be something much bigger, much larger, similar like the signs that you already have along 6th, but there might be some additional spots that we want to locate those. And then just additional wayfinding, helping people navigate through the downtown, knowing what's going on, where they want to be, what the key destinations are. That's something that we've talked about with the city, we've talked about with the chamber. Just making sure that as we start writing these plans recommendations that we're thinking about where some of those good locations might be and what some of the key destinations are that are going to help people navigate the downtown a little bit easier. The intersections, we just broke down what some of the existing contributing features are. Along Mass Street, you have several different features. You have outdoor seating, concrete sidewalk. You also have some of the raised planters, the angled parking, decorative brick. So something that's very, very relevant for a downtown Main Street, but then what's happening in the periphery, so what's happening on Vermont and New Hampshire, and those different streets are considerations that we'll be thinking of. I've talked to probably enough about the mid-block crossing. I just think it's something that's so unique that you have so many of them, so to just keep that rhythm up, make sure that they're improved. There are some crumbling passings or crumbling sidewalks or decorative pavers, so I think those will just want to be updated as we start to talk about all these other updates that could occur in the streetscape. And then sort of as I talked about on that overall map, breaking down the streetscape environment into these different zones. So what's happening up on 2nd Street in North Lawrence, what's happening in some of those residential streets, and then all the way down. All these different streetscapes make up the downtown. Can't treat them all the same way. They're different widths, they have different roles. So we'll be sure to incorporate that into the master plan. And then site furnishing and vegetation, those are you have quite a bit of site furnishing already in the downtown. You have benches, raised seating and planting areas, light fixtures, trash receptacles, recycling, paved materials. I think a lot of this is just bringing it into a more cohesive design. And then as you start to roll out improvements in the future, it'd be a little bit more clear or delineated about what happens on Mass, also should maybe happen on Vermont or happen on New Hampshire, happening on the east-west streets. All of that just be a little bit more coordinated. So I think it's more of an update or an upgrade as you start to look out to what you could do on these in these public realms. And then I talked a little about the plazas and gathering spaces. Again, I think it's not these big, large spaces that people crave. Sometimes it's these small little gathering spots, some breaks in, maybe that urban built form. Nothing massive, but just enough where they feel special when you find them. There's a couple already here. We take some or had some photos of or some good examples of. Just making sure that you incorporate that into new development as it begins in the future. And then public art is always fantastic. You have so much public art already. You have a lot of good resources that you can tap into to get that public art installed or applied in the downtown. I think it's just continuing that relationship. You can never have too much public art, in my opinion. I think it's just a great thing that really identifies, what makes you special, what's important to you, the talent that's here, and just making sure that you're able to incorporate that into dedicated spots, and then even some spots that might just randomly pop up for temporary installations. And then branding. We're not necessarily charged to do the branding. You already have a fantastic brand. I think our responsibility in the master plan is just to make sure that you're utilizing that brand to tell your story to anybody who's coming into the community. Just make sure that there's a good message between the wayfinding and the gateway signs, that all of that is a little bit more coordinated than it might already be or that it currently is. So that's the ECR. There's a lot of I know that's 90 pages for you to digest. If you have any questions, we can go through this. I do want to spend some time on the vision and guiding principles too. So, with that, any questions the commission may have?
Any questions? Okay.
Okay.
We'll have public comment after the presentation.
Yeah. For the vision and guiding principles. So this does get into us starting to define what the plan's going to talk about. So this is really the first switch that we made to everything that you've heard before, our issues, our opportunities, our current conditions. As we start talking about the vision and the guiding principles, this is our brain switching into this is what the possibilities can be. So the way that the vision is drafted, it's a retrospective vision. It's as if we're looking back in time, and all these things have been done. So this plan's a success. We were able to accomplish this and this. And again, I don't want to, I'm not going to read this to you because it's quite a lot to read. So I'm going to give you some of the highlights of kind of what's in each one of these. But it's as if we're in 2040 and you're looking back and you're thinking about all the things that this plan had talked about and they've been implemented. A lot of things that we talk about is just continuing to build that first paragraph. So this paragraph talks about, Lawrence is a thriving heart of the community. We talk about the improvements that have occurred on Mass Street. We talk about the new developments that have started to occur, and just making sure that the downtown is that anchor for the community, is that place that people want to continue to go to, and it's an important destination. The second paragraph, I feel like I'm not doing it justice by not reading it, but if I read this, it would be ridiculous. The Lawrence residents now have a location in the downtown. So there's more opportunities for residential development in the downtown. That's going to be a mix of residential options. It's not just one type. And I think that's going to be very important as we move into this downtown plan, talking about the different residential options that are available. That's going to require some of the updates to the zoning code to reflect that. Might even require some changes to the design guidelines. These are all things that we're going to explore to achieve this vision, to achieve the type of residential development we know the community wants to see. And then just also addressing or taking advantage of the rapid changes to technology in the transportation realm. There's some things that are happening now. I mean, even just talking about rideshare programs really does change the way people experience or get to a downtown, how critical parking is for certain things. And as that continues to evolve, and even as you start thinking further out, since we're 2040, you're thinking about some type of version of autonomous cars could be a reality. How does the downtown respond to that? How is it prepared for it? So if you build something in 2030, it's not already obsolete in 5 or 10 years. The next paragraph just talks about the new mixed-use development, including or incorporating some type of parking capacity. So again, as new development occurs, it's able to park itself or start to park itself. There might be some other opportunities around those sites, but the idea is that you're capturing that parking in there. The city has made a conscious decision to keep bike lanes on Mass Street or keep it off Mass Street, but also to make sure that bikes are able to move around the downtown still effectively. So if that's using Vermont or New Hampshire or the east-west streets, making sure that cyclists have a home here and that it's easy to navigate. The next paragraph just talks about the improved access to North Lawrence, and then also with the North Lawrence Loop, just improved access for cyclists, being able to get down to the river and taking advantage. The downtown should be taking advantage of that proximity to the river. So these are some of the ways that we're hoping in the future, working with these different partners, that's a reality. That's something that you could see in the future. The next paragraph, we're talking about how the river has become a source of sustainable energy. So tapping into, this resource that is the Bowerstock and being able to use that energy more efficiently and using that in the downtown is something that should be a goal to strive towards. Also this, using some of the funding for improving some of the buildings in the downtown. So if it's the facades or even on-site improvements, just ways that you could see building off of some of the assets that are already here and improving them so they have a longevity beyond, maybe what their current life is. The next paragraph also talks about the improved facades of it, just generally enhance the overall look of the downtown aesthetically. Also the streetscape, that upgrade, that refresh, just giving it a new life, a new breath in the downtown. Also looking at, public art installation, maybe creatively taking some of the buildings that are here now and doing something that's very different. Maybe the AT&T building has something that makes it an attraction or something that makes it a destination or something that's more like an experience. The next paragraph talks about just general streetscape improvements, looking at some of the permanent outdoor event space, looking at where the farmers market might be located, and just generally talking about the activity and drawing those in and having a more coordinated effort, throughout the year, making sure that downtown is able to do that on a yearly basis. And then the last one just just again, that civic hub, maintaining the downtown as this civic destination. It currently is, the idea is that over time, that doesn't change, that if anything, that continues to grow as new facilities are needed or as expansions are needed or improvements are needed, just making sure that the downtown remains that civic hub. So that's the vision statement. And then from the vision statement, so the vision statement is very broad in nature, lofty goals, a lot of ideas of what you'd like to see accomplished as part of the recommendations in the downtown plan. The next kind of tier down are these guiding principles. And the way we would like to use these guiding principles is basically any recommendation or action item or implementation strategy that we draft. It's achieving one of these guiding principles, or these guiding principles are being threaded throughout the document. So strengthening downtown as a destination is certainly a guiding principle, just making sure that you continue to have this be the place that people want to go. If they're from Lawrence, if they're from the region, this is where they want to go. They know they can park their car here, they can ride their bike here, and go to multiple destinations. It's not a one-stop place. This isn't a commercial corridor. It's a destination. It's somewhere you want to be. Leveraging the riverfront, that really can't be said enough. It's an asset that you're starting to tap into it with the trail that's on the north side of the river, but certainly having that Lawrence Loop and that connection, and then making sure that the downtown successfully connects to that Lawrence Loop in multiple locations, not just one, and that everybody has access to it, I do really think will help improve how people are able to get to the downtown, but also once you're in the downtown, maybe you go for lunch and you walk along the river. That's really not an experience you can do easily now, something that I think in the future is very possible. Balancing the historic preservation with infill development. We talked about this last night with the steering committee. We've really talked about this throughout the process, and this isn't a unique issue to Lawrence. We've seen this in a lot of communities where you have such a significant stock of historic buildings, some of them on the register, some of them are just functionally are beautiful buildings, or form-wise are beautiful buildings. And you want to maintain those, and you want to make sure that those continue to be here. You also want to accommodate or allow the opportunities for infill development. So there are some other areas where infill development is appropriate, and just make sure you're balancing those so they're not in conflict with one another. That the design guidelines or that the zoning code that allows for one doesn't hurt or somehow negatively impact the other. That's a hard balance to strike, and I think that's something as we work through the master plan, we're going to provide options about how the city moves forward, and that's something that we'll be talking about, I think, in detail inside the plan. Reinforce downtown as an economically thriving district. I think the example that I provided yesterday is, and it is a thriving district now, but just making sure that over time, as new uses are coming in, or as maybe there's always these transition of uses coming in and out, it doesn't go the way of a commercial corridor that's outside of the downtown. It needs to feel distinctly a downtown. It needs to feel like this unique district that it's always been, but also making sure that it's economically viable. And it's something that's successful. It allows for these niches. It allows for shops that you just don't see anywhere else, that only you would see those in a downtown. Just making sure that continues. Maintain downtown as the civic and cultural heart of Lawrence. Making it easy to get around. That's for both vehicles, pedestrians, cyclists, e-scooterists. I'm not really sure what their title will be. But giving all these different modes of transportation an easy way to move around the community, a safe way to move around the downtown, a safe way to move around the downtown, make sure those connections are provided, and those opportunities to park and then be able to become a different type of mode of transportation. And then create an attractive pedestrian environment. So that's both on what you're doing with the buildings, the facades of buildings, but also what's happening with the streetscape, how that might be improved in the future, how that could be something that just continues to be a draw or an asset. As you experience the downtown, it's one of the first things that you see when you drive in. As you're walking it, it's one of the first experiences that you have of what it looks like in that public realm. And then the last guiding principle, but in no order, ensure equitable participation and involvement. I know personally, having worked on this project over the last year or so, I know this is very important to the City Commission. I know this is very important to the City of Lawrence, just making sure that the process that has gone or that we've gone through, even in developing the existing conditions report and some of these vision and guiding principle language, just knowing that everybody has a role, everybody has a participation, everyone has a voice, and continuing that process. Even after this, there's still several meetings where we get to meet with the public. They get to give us their feedback on draft recommendations. This won't be the last time anybody sees or gives us an opportunity to make those changes, make those revisions, incorporate new ideas. And even after the plan's adopted, that's an important consideration is, this plan gets adopted, it's a 20-year vision, but you may find in 3 years there's something really specific that you want to address or something that needs to get updated. This plan can move with that, and we're going to provide flexibility within this document to accommodate that. So you're not locked in, and there's not just one way, because things change dramatically in 20 years. So with that, with that, if there's any questions on the vision statement or the guiding principles, we can go through that. The only other piece that I had was to talk about the next steps.
Any questions? Nope. Okay.
All right, so next steps, let me go to that. So the last time we talked, we were working on the existing condition report. So here we are presenting the existing condition report. Our next step is to start moving into actually drafting the downtown master plan. So we've already started some of this work, establishing the vision and the guiding principles. There are still some outstanding outreach components that'll be easy to kind of tie into where we're at in the draft plan process. Those visual preference surveys and the student workshops we're hoping to have wrapped up in the next month or so. After that, it's really on our team to start drafting the downtown master plan. It's going to take this vision, take these guiding principles, and flesh out the rest of these chapters. So the main things that we'll be talking about: land use, public realm improvements. We'll be looking at how you're going to access the river. So a lot of the key themes that we've talked about tonight might end up just being chapters or subsections. But the next time that we are back here talking with the community and doing a city commission work session, we'll be reviewing the draft plan basically in its entirety. And when I say in its entirety, I mean it'll be like the complete draft plan. Certainly some discussions will be had, directions will need to be identified, make sure that we're on track or we're on point. That open house, we're hoping, really gives an opportunity to the public to say, all this feedback that we've received up to this point, this is how we've folded it into the document that you're seeing now. It should resemble, even in structure and in design, the way that we've presented the existing condition report. So there shouldn't be any surprises. I think people know how we got to where we're at. We'll do that community open house, the city work session. We'll work with staff on making any revisions that are needed. Then we'll move into the final step, which is the actual draft plan document starting to get finalized. We'll do one more steering committee meeting so they get an opportunity to get their look at it. We told them we hope to see them at the community open house. We see them a couple of times throughout the process. We'll do another community open house where people will see the refinements. They'll see what changes were made, what updates were included. And then we'll start moving into the adoption phase of the plan. So, and the timeline on this, I think we're looking at into March, into April. Yep, that's our goal. Any questions on that?
Questions?
No?
Okay.
All right.
We will then open it up for public comment. Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, thanks. I'll open this back up.
K2 Walsh, I just have a question. I'd like to know what they thought about the alleys and the use, negative, positive, the trash, the dumpsters behind the businesses. And also, is it too early to ask for dates on the community meetings?
Yeah.
It is?
You can come up and answer.
I'm sorry, yeah.
The alleys. You know what, that's a good point, KT. We talked about that in the steering committee meeting yesterday, and I meant to bring that up. The alleys, when I talk about some areas that need some improvement, probably need to be updated, or at least some of the like crumbling facilities. The alleys are one. I'm also a strong believer that alleys should serve as alleys. I do think that's the appropriate place for things like trash receptacles, any kind of service drops that can occur. So the plan's going to talk about, are there aesthetic improvements that could happen? Are there repaving or improving some of the crossings there? Certainly that's something we'll talk about in the plan. There's also other creative ways to consolidate, where waste or where trash receptacles are picked up and how they're screened. But it is an alley, and that is something that, we're trying to balance. I don't want to get rid of the alleys because they keep so much off of your main streets as well. So, I mean, I hope that addresses your question. And then it is too early to identify dates, but I soon. I mean, we're going to get those dates out. I know it's important to us and to the community. I want to see a great turnout at the open house, so we'll make sure those dates are out there early enough so the message can get out, through the channels that I know the city has been successful with. Okay.
Other public comment?
I have a couple questions. One, I don't see any accommodations for electric cars.
So
Plug-ins?
try to address your comments to the commission, and if there are questions, we'll have the associates answer those.
Oh,
Say that
okay.
again?
Well, I was just wondering
Accommodations for
what they're going to do
electric
about the housing situation. What kind of, is it going to be a mix, low, medium income, or are you going to gear more towards middle and older people, or is it going to be towards college kids, or just where is that going to go?
Okay, can you state your name for the record?
Ma'am?
Can you state your name for the record?
I'm Dwight Dare.
Thank you, Dwight.
3112 Riverview Road.
Do you want to go ahead and answer those questions?
Get my steps in. So your first question, electric cars. Page 81, we talk about alternative parking strategies. One of the things that we will definitely provide recommendations for, if this is something the city's not currently doing, is as new development occurs, accommodating electric vehicles, accommodating charging stations. That is definitely a trend that we're seeing throughout many of the communities that we work in and really across the country. Oh gosh, what was the second one? Oh, a mix of residential. We will be exploring not just one type of residential. It's really not our charge to say it's going to be this. It's to give you the opportunity to be flexible as new development occurs, to know what some of those housing types, those residential housing types are. Making sure that you are providing a place where anybody that wants to live in downtown Lawrence is able to live in downtown Lawrence. We don't have recommendations yet. We're not there in the plan, but we will be soon. And those are things that I know we're going to be exploring as part of the process. Okay.
Other public comment?
Lyle Gooden, Pinckney area. All this sounds really good, but we have to have entrepreneurs that are going to fill these shops. We have trouble with that now, correct? There's lots of places en masse that are not filled. How are we going to? What kind of incentives are we going to have to bring some of this? These restaurants, these clubs, what kind of incentive can the city give to bring these people in? That's what, because we have a lot of empty stores as we speak. So we need to have something to fill these, correct? I would think.
Okay. Thank you. And we'll bring that question back at the end about incentives. Any other public comment? Okay, so in your recommendations, will you have any comments regarding incentives, or how we can accommodate addressing your recommendations?
Yeah, there were so many good ideas yesterday at the steering committee meeting. That was one that someone had mentioned, and I did mean to talk about, was we talked about in our vision statement where you're building off of some of the local context, the local business owners that are already here, and just making sure that if it's the city or if it's the chamber, is somehow incentivizing equity among business owners. I know that was very important among the steering committee members. We heard that through the community outreach. And it will be something we'll talk about in the plan about what those incentives look like, what's appropriate for Lawrence, and because you're right, I think there's a lot of opportunities. I'm sorry, you're right. There's a lot of opportunities to get business owners that want to be here, but just necessarily can't make it work. If it's financial, can't make the leases or the rates on rent work. And there are ways to sort of either offset that or incentivize that for both a property owner or a new business owner. So we'll look at that. Yep.
Thank you. All right, anything else from the commission? Okay, well, thank you for your presentation tonight, and I think that concludes our meeting for the evening.